The last thing I remember is my cold cup of ramen going soggy on my desk at 2 in the morning. Page 247 of Fated to You open on my tablet, and me thinking, honestly, the author did the villain dirty. Rourke Valentine deserved better. Then I died. Heart attack, apparently. 26 years old, no health insurance, no emergency contact, and apparently no survival instincts whatsoever. Very on brand for me. Then I woke up, and I was Rourke Valentine. Not Rourke Valentine, the misunderstood anti-villain I had sympathized with while stress-eating discount ramen at 2 in the morning. No, I was Rourke Valentine, the designated punching bag of the most popular BL Omegaverse novel of the past decade. Villain Omega, certified schemer, the one who lies and manipulates his way through 3 powerful alphas, only for all 3 of them to reject him in the most publicly devastating way possible before choosing the real protagonist. Sweet, golden, angelic Omega named Jasper Rhodes, the one the universe had always intended for them. So, that was my situation. I lay flat on a king-size bed that probably cost more than my entire previous apartment, staring at a ceiling so high it could double as a sky, and I took exactly 4 seconds to spiral before deciding I was absolutely not going to spiral. I had read this novel 3 times, cover to cover, twice on purpose, and once by accident when I could not sleep and my self-control was at an all-time low. I knew every beat, every conversation, every plot point like I had written it myself. I knew that in approximately 6 weeks, Rourke Valentine was scheduled to be publicly humiliated at the Mercer Industries annual gala in front of 400 people, filmed on someone's phone. And that video was going to go viral before he even made it to the parking garage. I knew the plot. I knew the players. I knew exactly how this story ended. What I had not prepared for was waking up in a body that smelled faintly like cedar in cold rain, in a penthouse apartment on the 42nd floor of a building in San Francisco, with my name etched in gold on the mailbox downstairs. Rourke Valentine was rich. Of course he was. The novel had been very specific about his financial situation. Old family money, not enough emotional support, and far too much pride for his own good. I could respect that. That was just good character writing. I sat up slowly and caught my reflection in the mirrored closet across the room. Dark hair slightly disheveled, sharp jaw, pale skin with faint shadows under eyes that were green enough to look almost unsettling. A body that had clearly not encountered a carbohydrate in several years. I looked like someone had sculpted a person out of expensive marble and then given him abandonment issues as a finishing touch. He looked incredible. I looked incredible. Whatever. We were the same person now. Okay, I said out loud, just to hear what Rourke's voice sounded like. Low, controlled, a little cold around the edges, like a warning wrapped in velvet. Okay, I can work with this. My new name was Rourke Valentine, 27 years old, Omega, former favorite of the Mercer pack, which was just a polished way of saying I had once been romantically entangled with 3 of the coldest, most emotionally unavailable alpha CEOs in Northern California. In the novel, Rourke had spent 2 years trying to secure a mating bond with Kaden Mercer, the eldest and the most terrifying. Tall, broad-shouldered, and built like someone had designed him specifically to break hearts and sign hostile acquisition deals simultaneously. Then there was Rhett Sullivan, Kaden's business partner, sharp-tongued and calculating to a degree that bordered on performance art. Rhett had kissed Rourke once at a rooftop party in the novel, and then acted like it had never happened for 6 consecutive months. And finally, Nathan Cole. The one the novel always described as the gentle one, the reasonable one, the almost kind one. He was the one I trusted least, not even close. In the novel, Nathan Cole had been the one who leaked Rourke's private journal entries to a gossip blog. Kind eyes, warm hands, and a knife in his back pocket the whole time. Classic secondary antagonist behavior dressed up in cardigan energy. two choices. One, play out the original plot, accept the humiliation, and disappear into background character irrelevance, while Jasper Rhodes lived his best life with three beautiful alphas who finally chose him the way the universe intended. Or two, use every single thing I knew about this story and make sure the ending looked nothing like what was written. I chose option two before I even finished the thought. I had not survived 26 years of questionable decisions and one fatal ramen incident just to lie down and take a scripted defeat. I swung my legs off the bed and felt something crinkle beneath my palm. A folded note on the nightstand, half tucked under a glass of water that had gone warm. I picked it up, and the instant my skin made contact with the paper, something slammed into me like a wall of cold water from the inside out. It was not a memory. Not exactly. It was more like feeling someone else's emotion press itself directly into my sternum. Rourke's emotion. Grief, deep and bone level, with a sharp undercurrent of humiliation threaded through it. And beneath both of those, something quieter. Something that sat still in a way that felt uncomfortably like love that had run out of places to go. I dropped the note and pressed my fingers against my chest, breathing slowly through it. In the novel, Rourke Valentine had no powers. Omegas in Fated to You were just omegas, scent bonds, heat cycles, pack dynamics. Nothing extra, nothing supernatural beyond the biology of their designation. Apparently, the transmigration package had come with upgrades. I waited until the feeling faded, then picked the note back up more carefully and read it with just my eyes this time. 3 words in handwriting I somehow recognized from Rourke's muscle memory alone. Kaden Mercer's. Controlled. Precise. Not a single wasted stroke. Don't contact us. I stared at it for a long moment, then I folded it neatly, set it back on the nightstand, and walked to the window. San Francisco stretched below me in the early morning gray, all fog and bay water and cold steel skyline. Somewhere in this city, Kaden Mercer was sitting in a corner office at Mercer Tower, thinking about quarterly earnings and absolutely nothing else. Rhett Sullivan was reviewing contracts somewhere and definitely not thinking about me. Nathan Cole was on his 3rd espresso and making excellent choices, I was sure. 6 weeks until the gala. 6 weeks to rewrite a story that had been written to destroy me. I pressed one hand flat against the cold glass and felt the city hum faintly into my palm. The distant vibration of traffic, wind, lives moving below. And underneath all of it, quiet as a breath held too long, I felt something else. A pull, faint and unwanted and deeply inconvenient, like a thread tied somewhere behind my ribs, tugging in 3 different directions at once. I had read enough Omegaverse to know exactly what that meant. I pulled my hand back from the glass. Absolutely not, I said. The fog didn't care. It kept rolling in anyway, which honestly was the most relatable thing in this entire situation. I stared at it for another 30 seconds, decided feeling things before breakfast was above my pay grade, and turned away from the window. First order of business, figure out exactly where I was in the timeline. The novel had a very specific sequence of events. Chapter 1 opened with Rourke already mid-spiral, 2 years into his involvement with the Mercer Pack and 6 weeks from the gala, which meant I had landed exactly at the start of the story's final act. The original Rourke had spent those 6 weeks making increasingly desperate and increasingly terrible decisions, each one feeding directly into the humiliation waiting for him at the end. I was not going to do that. I walked to the kitchen, which was enormous and aggressively clean in a way that suggested Rourke had either never cooked a meal in his life or had a housekeeper with very strong feelings about marble countertops. I found coffee, and I made it, and I stood at the kitchen island in silk pajamas that probably cost $400 and drank it slowly while I ran through the plot in my head like a strategy brief. The original timeline went like this. Week 1, Rourke tries to contact the pack and gets ignored. Week 2, he shows up at Mercer Tower unannounced, and Kaden has security escort him out, which gets photographed. Week 3, Nathan sends a carefully worded message through an assistant explaining that the pack has made its decision and Rourke should respect it, which is a devastating thing to do through an assistant, and Nathan absolutely knew it. Week 4, Rourke attends a mutual acquaintances event and Jasper Rhodes shows up for the first time, radiant and oblivious and smelling like sunshine and something warm, and all three alphas lock onto him immediately in the middle of a cocktail party like magnets finding north. Week 5, the journal leak. Nathan. Always Nathan. Week 6, the gala. I took another sip of coffee and stared at the fog outside. The thing about the original Rourke was that he had been written to fail. Not because he was stupid, not because he was weak. The author had made him sharp and proud and genuinely capable, and then written a world where none of that was enough because the universe had already decided he was the wrong choice. He was a placeholder, a cautionary tale, a before picture for a story that had never really been about him. That was what made it infuriating. That was what had made me, alone in my apartment at 2 a.m. with cold ramen, actually put the tablet down and stare at the wall for 10 minutes. He had deserved better. Well, now I was him, and I was going to make sure he got it. My phone was on the counter, Rourke's phone, black, expensive, with a cracked corner that felt oddly human given everything else in this apartment was immaculate. I picked it up without touching the screen first, testing, and nothing happened. No flood of emotion. The psychometry seemed to need direct skin contact with intention behind it, not accidental brushing. Good to know. I unlocked it with a thumbprint that apparently still worked and scrolled through the contacts. Kaden Mercer was at the top. No photo, just a name and a number, and the last message thread showed 42 days of silence after a single gray bubble that read, "This conversation is over." Rhett Sullivan was 3 contacts down. His last message to Rourke was almost funny in how surgical it was. A single line sent at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Nathan Cole had a little blue dot next to his name, indicating an unread message from 11 hours ago. I opened it. "I heard you're still in the building. For your own sake, Rourke, please don't do this." I stared at that message for a long moment. In the original novel, this message had wrecked Rourke. He had read it standing in the lobby of his own building, and it had cracked something in him that never fully healed before the gala finished the job. The author had written it almost tenderly, the way Nathan's voice could sound like concern while functioning as a door closing in your face. I set the phone face down on the counter. "Okay, Nathan," I said quietly to no one. "Good to know you're already running your playbook." I finished the coffee. I showered in a bathroom that had 2 shower heads and a heated floor and smelled faintly of Rourke's cedar and rain scent clinging to the tiles, and I stood under the water and thought about what I actually knew versus what I needed to find out. The novel had given me the broad strokes, but not the fine details. I knew the what, but not always the why behind the alpha's choices. I knew the plot, but not the full emotional logic underneath it. That was where the psychometry was going to matter. Every object carried a history. Every history carried a truth the original text had never bothered to show me. I got dressed in whatever Rourke's closet offered, which was an embarrassment of good taste. Dark trousers, a fitted gray shirt, a jacket so well cut it could have started arguments. I looked at myself in the mirror and decided that while I had no idea what I was doing, at least I was going to look devastatingly good while figuring it out. I grabbed my keys from the bowl by the door, and the moment my fingers closed around the key fob, the psychometry hit without warning. Not a gentle impression this time. A full scene, fast and sharp like a film clip, dropped straight into the back of my skull. Rourke, the original Rourke, standing in what I recognized as the lobby of Mercer Tower, key fob in his hand, watching through the glass doors as Kaden walked past inside without looking up. Not ignoring him, genuinely not seeing him, already looking somewhere else. And the feeling attached to that memory was not rage. It was not bitterness. It was something quieter and more devastating than both of those things. The particular grief of being invisible to someone who once knew exactly where you were in every room. I opened my eyes. I was still standing by the door. I set the keys down, flexed my fingers once, and picked them back up with my palm flat instead of my fingertips. Nothing. It was about intention. Contact was something I was focusing on. I filed that away, pocketed the keys more carefully, and headed for the elevator. The lobby of my building was all pale stone and morning light, doormen at the desk, a few residents moving through with coffee cups and laptop bags. Normal. Human. Tuesday morning in San Francisco, which looked the same whether you had transmigrated into a doomed fictional character or not, apparently. I nodded at the doorman, whose name tag said Gerald, and who nodded back with the practiced neutrality of someone who had seen rich people do strange things and had long since stopped cataloging them. I stepped outside. The air hit me first, cool and damp, salt underneath it from the bay. The city smelling like coffee and exhaust and fog that had not fully burned off yet. I stood on the sidewalk for exactly one breath, orienting, deciding. Mercer Tower was 12 blocks north. In the novel, Rourke had walked there the first morning because he could not afford to look like he was rushing, and because 12 blocks was long enough to rehearse everything he wanted to say and short enough that he could not talk himself out of going. I knew every step of that walk the way I knew the back of my own previous hand. I was not going to Mercer Tower, not today. Showing up at Mercer Tower was the first domino in the original spiral, and I was not touching it. I turned south. There was a cafe 3 blocks down that Rourke had mentioned in his internal narration exactly once, briefly, almost as an afterthought, as somewhere he used to go before. Before the pack, before the entanglement, before whatever Rourke Valentine's life had looked like when it was still quiet and his own. It had felt significant in the way small details in novels sometimes did, dropped in without ceremony because the author knew and the character knew, but the plot had already moved past it. I walked south. I found the cafe, blue awning, hand-lettered sign that said, Parallel Coffee, the kind of place that had been there 20 years and showed it in the best possible way. Dark wood, real plants on every windowsill, the smell of espresso so strong it hit me from outside. I pushed open the door and got in line behind 2 people arguing quietly about whether oat milk changed the flavor profile of an Americano, which was a very San Francisco conversation to overhear at 8 in the morning. I ordered. I paid. I took my coffee to a small corner table with a window and sat down. And for a moment, I just let myself exist without a strategy, which felt necessary before the actual strategy could begin. I was reviewing everything I knew about Nathan Cole's role in the journal leak, who he had sent it to, what the timeline had been, whether there was any way to intercept it before it happened, when the door opened. I did not look up immediately. I was mid-thought, coffee halfway to my mouth, already drafting a mental list of the things I needed to do before week 3, when the original timeline started accelerating. So it was not until a scent rolled across the cafe that I actually registered someone had walked in. Cedarwood, dark amber, something warm underneath that had no good name in any language I had ever spoken, rich and deep and complicated, like a fire that had been burning so long it had stopped needing anything to sustain it. My entire nervous system stopped like a skipped record. I knew that scent. I had read about it in the novel, described in careful and slightly overwrought prose by the author who had clearly developed feelings for her own alpha lead. But reading about something and smelling it while sitting in a cafe with a coffee cup halfway to your face were genuinely different experiences, and I was not even close to prepared for the difference. My pulse did something inconvenient. My fingers tightened on the cup. I looked up slowly, the way you looked at something you already suspected was a problem before it confirmed itself. Kaden Mercer was standing at the counter ordering coffee. He was taller than I had pictured from Rourke's memories, or maybe the memories had been dim enough at the edges that the reality was sharper. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of composed and deliberate stillness that powerful people cultivated until it looked effortless. He was not looking at me. He was reading something on his phone with a focused, unhurried expression, like the rest of the world was a minor consideration he had already accounted for. He had not seen me. I had approximately 4 seconds to make a decision. The original Rourke would have stayed very still and prayed he left without noticing. Or worse, he would have stood up, closed the distance, and said something that came out wrong, because grief made people say things that came out wrong. Either option was going to create a scene I did not need and start a clock I was not ready to start. I looked back down at my coffee. Kaden Mercer's scent was everywhere in this small cafe now, threading through the espresso in the damp morning air, wrapping around the back of my brain like a question I had already decided not to answer. The pull from this morning at the window was back, that inconvenient thread behind my ribs, but sharper now, insistent. The bond recognition working on biology that was not mine, but was mine now, responding to proximity with all the subtlety of a fire alarm. I hated it. I breathed through my mouth, very casually, like a normal person who was simply enjoying their coffee and was definitely not fighting their own nervous system. I heard him finish ordering, heard the quiet sound of him stepping back from the counter, heard the pause that followed, a pause just slightly too long for someone simply waiting for their name to be called. My shoulders were perfectly level. My face was directed at the window. I was the picture of someone with nowhere to be and nothing on their mind. Rourke. His voice was low, not loud enough to carry across the cafe, just exactly enough to reach me. Controlled and precise, the same as his handwriting, the same as everything about him in the novel. 3 syllables, my name, Rourke's name, and every single cell in this body recognized the sound of it. I took a breath, set my coffee down, turned around with the kind of measured ease that I absolutely had to fake from scratch, because every instinct in Rourke's body was doing something chaotic, and I was overriding all of it by sheer force of will. I looked at Kaden Mercer directly. Kaden, I said, easy, unhurried, like he was someone I had simply happened to notice rather than someone whose scent had just tried to rewrite my entire morning. Something shifted in his expression. Barely, just a fractional tightening around his eyes, like my tone had landed somewhere he had not expected it to land. In the novel, when this moment happened, and it did happen, I was realizing, I was inside the novel's chapter 1 right now. Rourke had looked away first. He had looked down at his hands and said something quiet and slightly desperate, and the author had described it as the moment Kaden truly stopped seeing him as relevant. I did not look away. Kaden held my gaze for a beat, 2 beats. His jaw was set in a way that suggested he had prepared for this conversation to go differently. I didn't expect to see you here, he said. I live 3 blocks that way, I said, and tilted my head toward the south with a slight smile that I kept perfectly light. I've been coming here for years. Before, I added, and let that word sit there without finishing the sentence, because the context was obvious, and finishing it would have made it about him, and I was not making this about him. His expression did something I could not fully read. Not guilt. Kaden Mercer was not built for guilt in any obvious way. Something more like recalibration, like he was adjusting the model of this conversation against the one he had expected to have. His coffee came up at the counter. He picked it up. He did not leave. How are you? He said instead. I considered him, really considered him, not as the alpha whose scent was currently doing something rude to my concentration, but as a variable in a situation I was trying to control. Kaden Mercer asking how I was, in the novel's first chapter, was not genuine concern. It was an exit strategy, a polite gesture designed to produce an emotional response that would confirm his decision and let him walk away feeling reasonable. The original Rourke had answered honestly. He had said, "I'm not okay," because he wasn't. And Kaden had nodded like that was expected, and it had been the end of the conversation and also the end of any ambiguity about how this was going to go. I smiled, fully, warmly, the kind of smile that implied I was the most untroubled person in this cafe. "Really well, actually," I said. "Thank you for asking." The silence that followed was genuinely satisfying in a way I had not anticipated. Kaden Mercer did not know what to do with that answer. I could see it in the half-second delay before his expression settled back into composure. The flicker of something that might have been confusion, or might have been something else entirely that he covered before I could identify it. He looked at me. I looked at him. His scent was still doing the thing. I was still breathing through it. The thread behind my ribs was still pulling with the insistence of something that had no concept of bad timing. "Good," Kaden said finally. "That's good." "It really is," I agreed pleasantly. He left. He walked out the door with his coffee and his perfect posture and his scent trailing behind him like a slow exit, and I watched the door close behind him and then turned back to my window and picked up my coffee cup again with both hands wrapped around it. My hands were not shaking. I was specifically noting that my hands were not shaking. The bond pull faded slowly, like a volume turned down in increments. I waited until it was low enough to think around, then exhaled and stared at the fog still sitting thick over the street. Round one. I had not expected it this morning. I had not expected him, but I had not looked away, and I had not said anything I would regret, and I had not given him the emotional confirmation he had walked in here prepared to receive. It was a small thing. It was the smallest possible thing. But in the original novel, small things had a way of accumulating into the entire shape of a person's fate, and I had just bent one of them, slightly and deliberately, in a different direction. I took a slow sip of coffee. "Okay," I said quietly, watching the fog. "Don't forget to like, subscribe, and also check our store for more varieties. We've got something special waiting for you." Good morning to me. The fog outside shifted. A break in it, narrow and brief, let through a blade of early sunlight that caught the surface of my coffee and threw a small, warm circle on the table. I watched it for a moment, then pulled out my phone and opened a new note. I titled it, "Things I Know That Rourke Did Not." Then I started writing. Week 1, Kaden goes quiet. No calls, no contact, uses the silence as a wall. Original Rourke interpreted this as a door still slightly open. It was not a door. It was a statement. Week 2, unannounced visit to Mercer Tower, security escort, photo, small disaster. I was skipping this entirely. Week 3, Nathan's message through the assistant. That one I needed to intercept differently, because Nathan's move in week 3 was not actually about Rourke at all. It was about creating distance before the journal leak in week 5. Nathan was building a record of reasonable behavior so that when the leak happened, he could plausibly claim he had tried to handle things gently. Classic. Week 4, Jasper Rhodes. I paused on that one. Jasper Rhodes was not a villain. The novel had been very clear about that, and I believed it, because I had read the second half of the book where Jasper was the main character, and he was genuinely kind and warm, and almost aggressively good in the way some people just were. He was not the problem. The situation was the problem. Jasper showing up and immediately drawing every alpha in the room like gravity was not something he was doing on purpose. It was just his nature, and his nature happened to collide catastrophically with Rourke's position. The question was whether I could change enough about my position before week 4 that the collision did not happen the same way. I was still thinking through that when the cafe door opened again, and a wave of something sharp and clean moved through the air. Juniper, cool and precise, with an undertone of black pepper that did not belong in a coffee shop and absolutely did not belong anywhere near my morning. Rhett Sullivan walked in. I stared at my phone screen and did not move a single muscle. Of all the possible configurations of this morning, both Kaden and Rhett appearing in the same cafe within 20 minutes of each other had not made my probability list. In the novel, Rhett and Kaden's offices were in the same building. They sometimes got coffee together. The cafe was apparently a regular stop. Of course it was. Of course I had walked into their regular spot. Rourke's memory supplied this information approximately 4 seconds too late, and I sat very still and considered my options. Rhett Sullivan was sharper than Kaden in specific ways that mattered. Where Kaden's coldness was structural, built into the architecture of who he was, Rhett's was tactical. He watched people the way you watched a board game, identifying which pieces were threats and which were distractions and moving accordingly. He had kissed Rourke once at a rooftop party and then filed it under tactical error and moved on, according to the novel. He did not make the same mistake twice. He did not make mistakes, period. And if something looked like one, it was usually a test. I was not going to be caught sitting in a corner looking like I was hiding. I turned slightly in my chair, one arm resting on the back of it, and looked out the window with the relaxed posture of someone with an excellent morning going exactly as planned. Rhett ordered without looking at the menu. Of course he did. He probably had not looked at a menu since 2019. I kept my gaze on the window and tracked him in my peripheral vision, which was where I intended to keep him permanently. Peripheral, manageable, annotated. He turned from the counter, and then he stopped. Not the way Kaden had stopped, with a slight recalibration and a careful approach. Rhett stopped the way someone stopped when they spotted a variable they had already calculated for and found it behaving differently than the model predicted. His gaze landed on me and stayed there, and I could feel it the same way you felt a drop in temperature. Not dramatic, just undeniable. I turned my head and looked at him with the same easy expression I had given Kaden. Measured, unbothered, warm without being open. Rhett, I said. He crossed the cafe and stopped at the edge of my table. He did not sit down. He stood there with his coffee in one hand and looked at me with those dark, assessing eyes and said absolutely nothing for long enough that a lesser person would have started filling the silence. I did not fill the silence. I had read enough of his chapters to know exactly what that silence was for. You look well, Rhett said finally. His voice was flat and even, stripped of inflection, the way someone stripped a room of furniture before an important conversation. Nothing to trip over, nothing to hold on to. I know, I said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, more like the ghost of a reaction he had decided against. That's not a normal response. You didn't ask a normal question, I said. You made an observation designed to prompt an emotional response. I'm choosing not to have one. I picked up my coffee cup. How are you, Rhett? He looked at me for another beat, long and quiet and surgical. What are you doing here? Drinking coffee, I said, in a coffee shop. I know, deeply suspicious behavior. This isn't your usual place. Interesting, he knew my usual places. I filed that under things the novel did not tell me and kept my expression neutral. I felt like a change, I said simply. Is that going to be a problem? No, he said, too quickly. He caught it and adjusted, the way someone adjusted their footing after almost slipping. No, I just didn't expect to see you. Kaden said the same thing, I said pleasantly. You two really need to work on your range. Rhett's eyes sharpened. Kaden was here? About 15 minutes ago. I tilted my head toward the door. You just missed him. I paused and then, because I could not entirely help myself, you two didn't coordinate your schedules this morning? I thought that was usually more of an operation. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the last one. Rhett Sullivan was recalculating something, and I could almost watch him do it. The small pull between his brows, the way his jaw shifted slightly before settling. Then he pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. I had not invited him to sit. He sat anyway. I noted that. You're different, he said. People change, I said. Not in 6 weeks. I looked at him over the rim of my cup. You'd be surprised. He leaned back in the chair and studied me with an expression I recognized from the novel, but that felt different at close range, less cold than careful, like he was trying to decide if what he was seeing was real. Rhett Sullivan had a specific relationship with things being real, which was that he trusted almost none of them until he had verified them from multiple angles. It was what made him excellent at his job and exhausting in every other context. "Why are you here, Rourke?" he said, not aggressively, just directly, the way he did everything. "I told you," I said. "Coffee." "You know what I mean." "I do," I agreed, "and I'm telling you it's coffee. Sometimes a thing is just the thing it is, Rhett. Not everything is a play." I set my cup down and looked at him steadily. "Are you here because you're worried about me, or because you wanted to check if I'm doing what you expected?" Something moved across his face, fast and quickly controlled, but there. The precise micro-expression of someone who had just been handed an accurate read and did not appreciate it. "I'm not worried about you," he said. "Okay," I said easily. "I'm not." "I heard you the first time." I smiled at him, genuinely, and watched the calculation in his eyes tip slightly sideways. "You don't have to worry about me, Rhett. I'm doing fine. Better than fine, actually. I woke up this morning feeling very clear about a lot of things." I leaned forward slightly, just enough to close the distance by an inch, and kept my voice conversational. "How are you doing? Genuinely, not the performance version." The question clearly landed somewhere unexpected. Rhett Sullivan was not someone people asked about in good faith, with their eyes holding steady and their tone carrying no hook in it. He sat with it for a moment, and in that moment his expression did something it almost never did in the novel. It went quiet. Not calculated quiet, just quiet. "Fine," he said. "Good," I said, and I meant it, which seemed to be the most confusing thing I could have offered him, because he looked at me for a long beat after that, like he was trying to find the angle I was working from and coming up empty. His scent was doing the same thing Kaden's had done, just differently shaped. Where Kaden's was a fire that had been burning a long time, Rhett's was rain on cold stone, sharp and clean, and somehow more unsettling for being contained. My nervous system registered it the same way. Inconvenient, insistent, biologically very rude. I breathed through it. I was getting better at breathing through it. "The gala is in 6 weeks, Rhett said. He said it neutrally, the way you stated a weather forecast. "I'm aware," I said. "You're planning to attend?" I tilted my head slightly. In the original novel, this question had been asked by Rhett through a text message 3 days before the event, and Rourke had answered yes because he had still been hoping, still been holding on to the idea that showing up was a form of courage rather than a form of self-destruction. The gala had been designed to be Rourke's last act. The author had known it. The alphas had known it. Only Rourke had not. I knew it. "I haven't decided yet," I said, which was true and also strategically useful, and also the last answer Rhett had been expecting, based on the way his shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly. "You haven't decided," he repeated. "I haven't decided," I confirmed. "I have 6 weeks. Things change." I glanced at the window, then back at him. "Including people, apparently, even in 6 weeks." Rhett looked at me for a long moment. His coffee sat untouched on the table between us. His jaw was set in that particular way he had when he was processing something that did not fit the framework he had built for it. And I let him process it, because that was how you worked with Rhett Sullivan. You gave him the truth in a shape he could not immediately categorize, and then you waited. "What are you doing today?" he said finally. The question surprised me, which I did not let show. "Why?" "Kaden's firm has an open event at the Ferry Building this afternoon. Industry thing. He'll be there." He paused. "Nathan is coming." I watched him. "Are you inviting me?" I'm informing you, he said. What you do with that information is your choice. It was such a Rhett Sullivan answer that I almost laughed. Almost. I pressed my lips together and looked at my coffee instead, because the honest response to that sentence was, "You are so exhausting," and I had not known him long enough in this life to say it yet. "Why are you informing me?" I asked instead. "Because you'll probably find out anyway," he said, "and I'd rather you find out from me." I looked at him steadily. In the novel, that sentence did not exist. Rhett Sullivan had not warned Rourke about anything. He had let the timeline move the way it moved and offered no cushioning because Rhett Sullivan did not do cushioning. He did precision. He did efficiency. He did not, as a rule, walk across a cafe and sit across from someone he had agreed to cut off and tell them something they did not need to know. "Thank you," I said, quietly and without irony. He blinked, just once, the tiniest disruption in the composure. "Don't thank me." "You did a nice thing," I said. "I'm going to acknowledge it. You can be uncomfortable about it if you want." The ghost expression came back to the corner of his mouth, closer to a real smile this time. He caught it and pulled it back, but I had already seen it, and I suspected he knew that. He stood, picked up his coffee, and adjusted his jacket with the quiet economy of someone who moved through the world in straight lines. "Take care of yourself, Rourke," he said. "Always do," I said. He walked out. I turned back to the window and sat with the silence he left behind. His scent was fading slowly, that cool juniper pulling back like the tide, and the cafe felt louder without the particular quality of attention he had been directing at me. Two alphas, same morning, same cafe. Neither one had gone the way the novel said it would, and both of them had walked out slightly off balance in ways they were definitely going to think about later. My phone buzzed on the table. A new number, no name saved. I picked it up carefully, palm flat, and felt nothing through the case. I flipped it over and read the screen. "This is Nathan. I know you saw my message. We should talk. Not here. Somewhere quiet." I set the phone down. Nathan Cole was making his move 4 days earlier than the original timeline, which meant something had shifted already, something in Kaden's behavior after the cafe, or Rhett reporting back, or both. The pack was communicating, and they were recalibrating. And the fact that Nathan was moving faster meant he was nervous about something he had not been nervous about before. That was interesting. That was very interesting. The thread behind my ribs pulled again, taut and persistent, and I pressed one hand flat against my sternum and looked at the spot on the table where Rhett's untouched coffee had been sitting. I had 2 unread novels worth of knowledge about these people. I had psychometry that could peel back layers of truth from every object they had ever touched. I had 6 weeks and a mind that had survived 26 years of bad decisions and 1 fatal ramen incident, and I was not going to waste any of it. I picked up my phone and typed back to Nathan. "Sure, you pick the place." 3 dots appeared immediately. He had been waiting. I noted that too. "Coffee house on Larkin, 2 hours." I looked at the message for a moment. Nathan Cole, kind eyes, warm voice, and in approximately 4 weeks he was going to leak every vulnerable thing Rourke had ever written in a private journal to a gossip blog and watch the fallout from a safe distance. I knew what he was. I knew what he was going to try to do. What I did not know yet was why. The novel had never given me that. It had shown the action and skipped the motive, the way some stories did when the villain was a secondary character and the author had already moved the camera elsewhere. I had always thought that was the weakest part of the book. A betrayal without a root cause was just a plot device. I was about to find out the root cause, and I was going to do it while looking calm and well-rested and completely unafraid, because that was apparently my entire strategy this morning, and it was working better than I had expected. I left a tip on the table, pulled on my jacket, and stood up. The fog outside had burned off almost entirely now. The sunlight was coming in clean and flat through the windows, turning the cafe warm and golden, and I walked through it toward the door, feeling the weight of 6 weeks of carefully mapped disaster sitting in my chest like a countdown clock. I could change this. I had already started. 2 small things, 2 bent dominoes, and the shape of the fall was already different from the one I had memorized. The question was what Nathan Cole was going to say in 2 hours, and whether I would be able to keep my expression perfectly steady when he said it. I pushed open the door and stepped into the San Francisco morning. I would manage. I always did. The walk to Coffee House on Larkin took 23 minutes at a pace that was neither hurried nor slow, just deliberate, the kind of pace that said I chose to be here rather than I was summoned. San Francisco's morning had settled into something almost agreeable, the fog fully gone now, the sky a pale and watery blue above the rooftops, the streets busy with the specific mid-morning energy of a Tuesday that had nothing particularly against you yet. I used the 23 minutes to think about Nathan Cole. In the novel, he had appeared in approximately 40 scenes. I had read all of them. I had read them the way I read everything I found interesting, which was carefully and with too much attention to the details other readers scrolled past. Nathan was written as the gentle one, the warm one, the one who brought Rourke tea when he had a headache and remembered which coffee order he preferred, and sat with him through 2 separate instances of packed tension without making it about himself. He was also the one who took Rourke's private journal, a physical journal, handwritten, kept in the drawer of the desk in the Pax shared safe house, and photographed every page and sent them to a gossip journalist named Elliot Voss, who ran a blog called Hierarchy Unfiltered, with a readership of about 40,000 people, most of whom were very interested in the private, emotional landscape of San Francisco's wealthiest omega. The novel had presented this as a plot twist. It had not been a twist for me because I had read the spoilers before I read the actual book, which was a habit I had and refused to apologize for. But even knowing it was coming, I had never fully understood why. The author had written Nathan's motivation as jealousy, specifically jealousy over the Pack's attention being divided, Nathan wanting Kaden fully present and finding Rourke's continued presence an obstacle. But it had always read thin to me. Nathan Cole was too careful for petty jealousy, too deliberate. There was something underneath it the novel had not bothered to excavate because by chapter 37, the camera was already pointed at Jasper Rhodes, and everyone else was scenery. I was about to find out what was actually underneath it. Coffee House on Larkin was smaller than Parallel, darker wood, lower ceilings, the kind of place that leaned into its own intimacy like it was proud of it. The kind of cafe where conversations felt private by default because everyone else was too close and therefore collectively pretending they could not hear anything. I pushed open the door and spotted Nathan immediately. He was already there, corner booth, facing the door, hands wrapped around a mug. He had seen me the instant I walked in, and he had a specific expression ready, open, warm, carefully calibrated to read as concerned without being dramatic. He was wearing a dark green sweater that probably cost $300, but was cut to look like the kind of thing you just reach for without thinking. His hair was slightly unsettled, like he had run a hand through it once on the way over. He looked exactly like someone you could trust with a secret. I walked over and sat across from him without being invited to sit, which felt like the right energy to open with. "Nathan," I said. "Rourke." His voice was warm. Careful warmth, the kind with architecture behind it, but warm nonetheless. "Thank you for coming." "You asked," I said. I was curious. Something in his expression adjusted slightly. He had expected something else from that sentence, I could tell. Something softer, maybe. "Can I get you anything?" "I'm fine," I said. I folded my hands on the table and looked at him with the most open, neutral expression I could assemble, because with Nathan, the right move was to give him a surface that showed him nothing to push against. Rhett Sullivan needed to be handled with precision. Nathan Cole needed to be handled like a door you were not sure was locked. He looked at me for a moment, and I watched him recalibrate the same way Rhett had, though differently. Where Rhett's recalibration was analytical, Nathan's was emotional. He was reading my affect the way a perceptive person read a room, checking temperature and pressure, adjusting his approach accordingly. "I'll be honest with you," he said. "Please," I said, and meant it with more layers than he knew. "We're worried about you." He said it simply, no performance around it. "Kaden won't say it because you know how he is, and Rhett won't say it because Rhett doesn't say things like that. But I'm saying it." "Who is we?" I asked. He paused. "The pack. The pack that sent me a note telling me not to make contact," I said pleasantly. "That pack?" His jaw tightened very slightly, just at the hinge. "That was 6 weeks ago. It's been complicated, Rourke." "For me too," I said. "Very complicated. Deeply complicated. I'm working through it remarkably well, I think." He looked at me steadily. Nathan Cole had good eyes. That was not a fictional embellishment. The novel had simply told the truth. Dark and genuinely attentive, the kind of eyes that made people feel seen because they usually were. It was one of the reasons the journal leak had been so effective in the original timeline. The betrayal had come from exactly the direction Rourke had least expected because Nathan had always looked at him like he mattered. "You seem different," Nathan said. "Kaden said I seemed well. Rhett said I was different. You're all very creative," I said. His eyes narrowed, not with hostility, with the specific narrowing of someone trying to recalibrate faster than the situation was letting him. "You talked to both of them this morning?" "Separately. Same cafe, different times. Very efficient city, San Francisco." I tilted my head. "Did they call you?" The slight pause before his answer was its own answer. "Kaden mentioned it." So Kaden had reported back within the hour. That meant the pack communication was active and tight, which meant they were all paying more attention to me than the original timeline would have suggested at this point. I had bent 2 dominoes and the whole row was already sensing the vibration. Interesting. Very interesting. "So you called me here because Kaden mentioned he ran into me," I said. "Not because you were independently worried." "Both," Nathan said. "The second one was already true before this morning." I looked at him. He held my gaze without flinching, and I noted that too, because most people flinched when you looked at them the way I was looking at him. Not with hostility, just with visibility. Like I could see the full shape of them and was taking my time with the inventory. "Okay," I said finally. "What did you want to say, Nathan? Not what you wanted to check. What you came here to say." He was quiet for a moment. His hands moved around his mug and something in his posture shifted, less prepared, more actual. Like the script he had brought with him had just gotten set aside. "I want to know if you're going to the gala," he said. "Rhett asked me the same thing," I said. "I know." He exhaled through his nose. "I'm asking because it matters. Not the way you think it matters, but it matters." I leaned back slightly in the booth and studied him. "Explain the way I think it matters." "You think we're asking because we want to know if you're going to make a scene?" he said, straight and quiet. "Or because we want to prepare for it? Or because Kaden wants to have a plan?" I said nothing. "That's not why I'm asking," Nathan said. "Then why?" He looked down at his mug for a beat, and in that beat his expression did something the novel had never shown me from the inside. Something that looked uncomfortably like uncertainty. Not performed uncertainty, the real kind that sat in the body instead of the face and leaked into the face by accident. "Because I think if you go," he said slowly, "something is going to happen that nobody has planned for. And I don't know yet if that's bad." I stared at him. That was not a Nathan Cole line. That was not a line from anyone in Fated to You. The Nathan in the novel had been a closed system, motivated, directed, aimed. He had known what he was doing and why. even if the Y had stayed off screen. This version, sitting across from me with his hands around a cooling mug and his careful warmth gone slightly unsteady at the edges, looked like someone who was not entirely sure of his own coordinates. My psychometry was humming at the back of my awareness. I had not touched anything of his. I was not going to, not yet, not here, because Nathan Cole was observant enough that he might notice the deliberateness of it. But I was aware of everything his hands had touched since he sat down. The mug, the edge of the table, the napkin he had folded and set to the side. "What do you think is going to happen?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "That's the problem." Outside the cafe window, the sky had gone slightly darker in the last 10 minutes. Not dramatically, just the flat blue shifting to something with more gray in it. The marine layer making a second attempt at the city the way it often did in the late morning. I watched a couple walk past on the sidewalk, close together, one of them laughing at something, and turned back to Nathan. "You said you'd be honest with me," I said. "I am being honest." "Partially," I said. "You're being honest about the parts that are convenient to be honest about. There's something else." I kept my voice mild, almost gentle. "You don't have to tell me, but don't perform transparency and call it the whole thing." The silence that landed after that sentence was a different weight from all the other silences this morning. Nathan looked at me across the table, and something in him went still in the way things went still just before they shifted. And then the ceiling above us made a sound, and the first drops hit the window, and within 30 seconds the rain was coming down in full. The kind of rain San Francisco occasionally produced with no warning and no apology. Sheets of it against the glass, turning the street outside into a blur of gray and moving color. Nathan looked at the window, then back at me. Neither of us moved. "Great," I said. "It'll pass," he said. "You don't know that. It usually passes." "Nathan, I can see a man out there trying to hold a newspaper over his head like that's going to help. It is not passing." The corner of his mouth moved. A real reaction, unguarded, and it made him look younger and more human than any version of him I had encountered in the novel. He reached for his mug and took a sip and set it back down, and then he said, "I owe you an apology." I went very still. "I handled things badly," he said, "specifically, not generally. The message through the assistant was wrong. That was my suggestion, not Kaden's, and it was a cowardly way to communicate with someone who deserved a direct conversation." He said it without self-flagellation, just evenly, the way you said a true thing. "I'm sorry for that." In the original novel, Nathan had never apologized for anything. He had leaked the journal and vanished into the background of Jasper Rhodes' story, and the narrative had let him stay there, comfortable in his distance. The fact that he was apologizing now for something comparatively minor, while the weather locked us both in this corner booth, I did not know what to do with it. "Okay," I said carefully. "You don't believe me," he said. "I'm deciding whether to," I said, which was honest. He nodded like that was reasonable. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask," I said. "I'll decide when I hear it." "When Kaden saw you this morning," Nathan said, "how did he seem?" The question landed strangely. Not the content of it so much as the texture. The way Nathan was watching me as he asked it, was something careful and close underneath the openness. "Fine," I said. "Why?" "He's been off," Nathan said quietly. "For about 3 weeks. Not in a way that's visible to most people, but I know him." He paused. I thought he'd seem relieved, after everything settled, but he doesn't. I looked at Nathan Cole sitting across from me in this dark, rain-locked cafe, and I thought about what I knew about him and what I did not know about him. And for the first time since waking up this morning, I felt the ground shift very slightly under a conclusion I had been confident in. The novel had given me Nathan Cole as a villain. It had given me his action and skipped his interior. But the man across from me was describing Kaden Mercer's emotional state with the precision of someone who was paying attention, not because it was useful, but because he cared. That was a different kind of attention. That was the kind that cost something. The rain hammered the windows. Neither of us moved to leave. The cafe hummed around us with other people's conversations and the smell of coffee and wet coats coming through the door. He seemed exactly like himself, I said finally, which tells you more than fine does, probably. Nathan looked at me for a long moment. Yeah, he said softly. Yeah, it does. We sat in the rain noise for a while without filling it. He ordered me a coffee without asking whether I wanted one, and I let him, because it was cold now and the rain was not stopping, and arguing felt like more energy than the situation warranted. The coffee came and I wrapped my hands around it, and across the table Nathan did the same with his refill, and we were two people sitting in a storm with too much unsaid between us and not enough time to say it safely. His hand was resting on the table, flat, relaxed, close enough. I made myself look out the window instead. Not yet. I needed to know more before I touched anything of Nathan's and risked feeling the full weight of what he was carrying. Because the truth I had woken up sure of this morning was already blurring at the edges, and I needed it to stay clear long enough to protect myself, just in case. Just in case Nathan Cole was more complicated than the novel had bothered to show me. The gala, I said. Yeah, he said. I'll think about it, I said, which was not yes and was not no, and was also, I realized as I said it, completely true. Nathan nodded slowly, and he looked out the window at the rain, and his profile in the gray light was quiet and unreadable in a way that made something in my chest do a slow, inconvenient thing that I immediately categorized as a biological response and nothing more. The thread was there again, all three strands of it, persistent and low, like a cord held just past comfortable. The rain kept going. We waited. The rain did not pass. It deepened, which was very on brand for San Francisco, and also for this entire morning, which had decided early on that it was going to be as complicated as possible, and was committing to that decision with real dedication. Nathan's phone buzzed on the table twice in quick succession. He glanced at it, silenced it without answering, and set it face down. I noted who had been calling. I had seen the name in the half-second before the screen went dark. Kaden. So the pack was tracking this meeting in real time. Kaden had reported the cafe encounter. Rhett had presumably added his own report, and now Nathan was sitting across from me while Kaden called to check the temperature of a conversation that was not going the way anyone had scripted it. I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip and said nothing, because saying something about it would have given Nathan a direction to redirect toward, and I wanted him slightly off-center for what I was about to do. You can answer it, I said. It can wait, he said. It's Kaden. His expression did not change, but his shoulders moved. Barely. Just enough. I know whose it is. And you're letting it go to voicemail, I said. Interesting. It's not interesting, he said. It's a phone call. Nathan, I said gently, you have answered every Kaden Mercer phone call within 2 rings for as long as I have known you. You letting that ring out is the equivalent of anyone else throwing the phone into the bay. The quiet that followed had a different quality from the earlier ones. Something rueful in it. He picked up his mug and turned it in his hands. Not drinking, just moving it. He wants a status update, he said. On me, I said. On the conversation. Which is about me, I said. So, on me. He set the mug down, looked at me directly. Does that bother you? I considered the question with genuine honesty, which was something I was allowing myself in small doses, because honesty, when unexpected, tended to destabilize people more effectively than deflection. It used to, I said, being discussed without being present, being the subject of a conversation I wasn't invited to. I ran my thumb along the edge of my own cup. I've reframed it. Into what? Into information, I said. If you're talking about me, you're thinking about me. People don't spend energy on things that don't matter to them. I looked at him. So no, it doesn't bother me anymore. Nathan Cole looked at me across the dark wood table in the rain-loud cafe and said, "Who are you?" Not cruelly, not as an accusation. He said it the way you said something when the sentence arrived before you had decided to say it. Quiet and a little unguarded and genuinely curious. "Rourke Valentine," I said. "Same as always." "No," he said slowly. "Not the same." I did not argue with him, because arguing would have required an explanation I could not give, and also because he was right, and some truths were better left sitting in the open air without anyone touching them. His phone buzzed again. He silenced it again without looking. Outside, the rain shifted, not lighter, just different, coming at a slight angle now as the wind picked up off the bay and redirected everything. A woman ran past the window holding a tote bag over her head and looking personally offended by the weather. Two men in suits stood under the cafe's narrow awning, sharing an umbrella with the tense energy of people who had not planned to share personal space today. "Tell me something true," I said. Nathan looked at me. "You came here to assess something," I said, and then the rain happened and the script got complicated. "So tell me something true, not managed, not pre-selected." I held his gaze. "You said you'd be honest." A long pause. The cafe hummed. Rain hit glass. "I didn't want to cut contact," he said, low and even. "That was not my preference." I kept my face still. "Whose was it?" "It was a packed decision," he said, which was not an answer. "Nathan," he exhaled, set his hands flat on the table. "Kaden's. It was Kaden's call, and Rhett supported it, and I didn't fight it the way I should have." He said it without drama, just the flat weight of something he had said to himself before, but not out loud. I thought it was the right move at the time. I thought space was what everyone needed, including you. "And now?" I said. "Now I think I was wrong about what I thought was right," he said, which is a specific kind of bad feeling. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I reached across the table, slowly, and picked up the folded napkin he had set aside when I arrived. His napkin, something his hands had been on since he sat down. The psychometry hit clean and immediate. Not a memory this time, an emotion map, layered and dense, the way objects that had been held with tension always were. The top layer was anxiety, recent and surface level, the kind that came from a conversation you had been dreading. Underneath that, something older. Guilt, but not the guilt of someone who had done a thing and regretted it. The guilt of someone who had not done a thing and was still living in the gap where the action should have been. And underneath even that, so deep it almost did not register, something that made my breath catch for just a second before I smoothed my expression back out. Fear. Specific and directional, aimed not at me but at someone else. Not Kaden, not Rhett, aimed inward. Nathan Cole was afraid of himself, of something he was capable of doing or had already decided to do, or was being pulled toward against his own preference. The emotion had the texture of someone standing at an edge they had not chosen to stand at, looking down, knowing they were going to step off because the thing pulling them was stronger than the thing holding them back. I set the napkin down carefully. "The journal," I said. Nathan's hands went very still on the table. I had not planned to say it. The word had come out of the psychometry and through my mouth before my brain had fully authorized the release, which was a thing I was going to need to work on if I was going to use this ability without detonating conversations prematurely. But it was out now, sitting on the table between us like something that had been dropped from a height. "What?" Nathan said. His voice had gone carefully neutral in a way that was itself a tell. "The journal," I said again. Calm, steady. I held his gaze and did not blink. "Rourke's journal, the one in the safe house desk." I tilted my head slightly. "You know the one." The color in Nathan's face changed. Not dramatically, just a shift. The way a room changed when a cloud moved across the sun. He was looking at me with something that was trying to be confusion and not quite getting there. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Nathan, I said, gently, like I was correcting someone I actually liked, which was a feeling I was experiencing with genuine ambivalence. You're a very good person pretending to have a very good poker face. Those are two different skill sets, and they don't combine as cleanly as you're hoping right now. Silence. Rain. His jaw worked once. Then, how do you know about that? I know a lot of things, I said. The more interesting question is why? He looked at me. Why what? Why would you do it? I said. Not accusatory, just a question, flat and open, the same way I would have asked anyone to explain something I genuinely wanted to understand. You, not someone else. You, Nathan. Because the version of you sitting across from me right now does not read like someone who does things like that casually. The silence stretched long enough that I heard the couple 2 tables over finish paying their check and gather their coats. Heard the range shift register again. Heard Nathan's slow exhale through his nose. It hasn't happened yet, he said finally. I absorbed that. But you're planning it. Another pause. Someone approached me, he said. The words came out like something being set down carefully, piece by piece. A journalist. She reached out through a contact 3 weeks ago. Said she had information about the pack that she was going to publish regardless, and that if I cooperated, she'd make sure Rourke's involvement was framed sympathetically. He stopped. Kara Voss, I said. His eyes snapped to mine. How do you... Keep going, I said. He looked at me with the expression of someone who had just realized the conversation was several moves ahead of where he had thought it was, and was deciding in real time whether to catch up or stop. He chose to catch up. She said the story was coming either way, that she had sources inside the pack's business dealings, that if I gave her something first, I could control how it was framed. He pressed his lips together. She specifically asked about your journal. And you said yes, I said. I said I would think about it, he said. I haven't said yes. But you haven't said no, I said. The silence after that was the loudest one yet. Nathan Cole sat across from me in the gray rainlight, looking like someone who had been carrying a stone in his chest for 3 weeks and had just been given permission to put it down. Except putting it down meant admitting it had been there. She has something on me, he said. I went very still. Not criminal, he said quickly. Nothing like that, but personal. Something I did 2 years ago that I'm not proud of and that Kaden and Rhett don't know about. He looked down at the table. She told me if I didn't cooperate, she'd run that instead, with my name on it. I sat back in my chair and let the full geometry of this reconfigure itself in my mind. In the novel, Nathan had leaked the journal out of jealousy. The author had written it as a character choice, calculated, selfish, motivated by pack dynamics and personal ambition. And that version was clean and readable and completely wrong, because what was actually sitting across from me was a man who was being blackmailed, who had been quietly terrified for 3 weeks, who had called me here not entirely to assess me, but also, I was starting to understand, because he did not know what to do, and he had run out of people he could tell. The thread behind my ribs pulled, not with the biology of the bond this time, with something more inconveniently human. What did you do 2 years ago? I said. He looked up, something raw in his face now, the warmth still there but thinner, showing the actual person underneath the careful presentation. I accessed private financial records, he said. Mercer Industries, before Kaden brought me into the inner circle. I was trying to verify something I'd been told about the company before I fully committed. He exhaled. It was illegal. I didn't use what I found, and I never told anyone. But it happened, and I should have known better, and if Kaden finds out... He stopped. I finished the sentence in my own head. If Kaden finds out, the pack dynamic fractures. Kaden Mercer built everything on loyalty and integrity as structural principles, not preferences. A betrayal of that even a small one from 2 years ago, even one that had produced nothing and hurt no one in practice, would land like a demolition charge in the specific architecture of his trust. Nathan was not a villain. He was a person caught between two versions of wrong, trying to find a way through that hurt the least number of people, running out of time and carrying it entirely alone. I breathed out slowly. "Okay," I said. He looked at me. "She's not going to run either story," I said. "You don't know that," he said. "I know more than you think I know," I said. "And I know that Kara Voss's leverage depends entirely on you being afraid of it. The moment it goes from threat to action, she loses the leverage, which means she needs you more afraid than she needs the story." I leaned forward slightly. "Who told you about the financial records in the first place? Who gave you the original information that made you go looking?" Nathan frowned. "A contact. Someone I met at an industry event. I haven't thought about it in a while." "Think about it now," I said. "Name if you have it." He thought. "Marcus," he said slowly. "Marcus Vell. He worked adjacent to Mercer Industries at the time. I only met him twice." I had never heard that name in the novel. It was not there. Not in any of the 40 scenes, not in any background detail, not mentioned in passing. Marcus Vell was new information, which meant he was real information, which meant the novel had been built on a foundation that the author herself had not fully mapped. "Someone pointed you at those records deliberately," I said, "and now someone who knows about it is threatening to expose you unless you hand over material that would destroy me publicly." I held his gaze. "Does that sound like coincidence to you?" Nathan stared at me. "Because it doesn't sound like coincidence to me," I said. "It sounds like a setup that started 2 years ago and is currently in its second act." The rain outside went suddenly harder, a brief intensity, and then softened again. Nathan had not moved. He was looking at me with the expression of someone watching a locked room open from the inside. "Who would do that?" he said. "And why?" "I don't know yet," I said, which was true. The novel had never given me a Kara Voss with a Marcus Vell behind her. Whatever this was, it was not in the original text. Someone was running a play that the author of Fated to You had never written, which meant something outside the original plot was in motion, and I was standing in the middle of it with 6 weeks until a gala, and a set of facts that were rearranging themselves into a shape I had not prepared for. I was also sitting across from Nathan Cole, who was looking at me like I was the first solid ground he had found in 3 weeks, and I had approximately 4 contradictory feelings about that simultaneously. "Don't contact Kara Voss," I said. "Don't agree to anything. Don't negotiate. Don't send any follow-up. Just silence." "And if she escalates," he said. "Then we deal with it when she escalates," I said. "But she won't. Not yet." I picked up my coffee. "And Nathan, tell Kaden." His face went tight. "I can't." "Not about the records," I said. "Not the specifics, not yet. But tell him something is wrong. Let him know you're carrying something." I held his gaze steadily. "Because you have been carrying this alone for 3 weeks, and it is making you do things you don't want to do. And the people around you can see that something is off, even if they can't name it." I paused. "Kaden told someone you seemed off. That got back to me." Nathan looked at me. "Kaden said that?" "Not to me directly," I said, "but it got back." Something moved through his expression, complicated and quiet and landing somewhere deep. He looked down at his hands, turned his mug once, set it back down. Outside, the rain finally began to ease, going from sheets to a steady pour, then lighter, the gray thinning towards something that might eventually become afternoon light. The street outside reappeared in increments, wet and shining, the people under the awning deciding at last to make a run for it. "Why are you helping me?" Nathan said. He looked up at me when he said it. No performance, just the question, bare and honest. I thought about that for a moment. The real answer was complicated and involved transmigration and a novel I had read 3 times and a conclusion I had been certain about this morning that was no longer certain in the same shape. The available answer was simpler. Because you came here to help me, I said. Even if the shape of it was off, the instinct was right. I stood and picked up my jacket from the seat beside me. And because someone is running a play that targets both of us, and being in separate corners while that happens is exactly what they want. Nathan looked up at me from the booth, and for the first time since I had walked into this cafe, the warm, careful presentation was fully gone, and there was just a person sitting there, tired and slightly relieved, and not entirely sure what to do with either feeling. "Rourke," he said. I pulled my jacket on. "Yeah." "I'm sorry," he said, "for the assistant message, for all of it." I looked at him for a moment. "I know," I said, and I walked toward the door, and the cool, wet air of the aftermath hit me when I pushed it open, and San Francisco smelled like rain and pavement and something almost clean. I stood on the sidewalk and let the light drizzle settle on my shoulders and thought about Marcus Vell, about Elliot Voss, about a setup that had started 2 years before this story was supposed to begin, about a novel that had gotten the ending right and the reasons completely wrong. The thread behind my ribs was present and steady and entirely unhelpful. I started walking. The drizzle was light enough to ignore and persistent enough to be annoying, which was exactly the kind of weather that matched the inside of my head right now. I walked without a destination for half a block, which was all I allowed myself before deciding that aimless walking was for people who did not have active problems to solve, and I currently had several. Marcus Vell. I turned the name over as I walked. The novel had 40 scenes featuring Nathan Cole, and not one of them had contained that name, which meant either the author had constructed an incomplete backstory and moved past it without realizing what she had left out, or something genuinely outside the original text was in motion, a variable that had not been part of the story when I read it. The second option was the one that made my shoulders tight. If I was inside a fixed narrative, I had a map. Imperfect, cracked in places, but a map. If the narrative had already diverged from the original before I arrived, if someone or something had introduced a new element that the author had never written, then my advantage was narrower than I had calculated this morning over expensive coffee in a too-clean kitchen. I needed information I could not get from memory. I needed to touch something that had been near the people running this play, and I needed to do it without tipping anyone off that I was doing it, which meant I needed access and proximity and a reason to be somewhere that did not read as desperation. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out carefully, palm flat against the case. No psychometry through the case. I read the screen. It was a calendar notification. Rourke's calendar. The ferry building event Rhett had mentioned this morning, the Mercer Industries industry gathering, open format, 200 people, 3 hours, starting in 40 minutes. Rhett had told me about it. He had told me specifically in that Rhett Sullivan way of giving information without technically extending an invitation, which was as close to an invitation as Rhett got. I looked at the notification for a moment, then I looked up at the street signs, got my bearings, and turned east toward the Embarcadero. The ferry building sat at the edge of the city where Market Street met the bay, a long, pale landmark with a clock tower that San Francisco treated with the particular civic affection reserved for things that had survived earthquakes and redevelopment and the general chaos of being a city that could not decide what it wanted to be. The event was in the main hall and the marketplace around it, which meant 200 people moving through a large open space with bay windows and the smell of the water coming in every time a door opened. It also meant objects, surfaces, 100 points of contact between people who might know exactly who Marcus Vell was and why he had been in the same room as Nathan Cole 2 years ago. I arrived with 12 minutes to spare, which felt right. Not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to make an entrance that drew the wrong kind of attention. The hall was already filling, the particular murmur of an industry event at full warmth, suits and smart casual, and the kind of careful networking that looked relaxed from a distance and was not relaxed at all up close. I got a glass of water from the first table I passed, held it in my palm and felt nothing but the temperature of the glass, and moved into the room. I spotted Rhett first. He was across the hall in conversation with two people I did not recognize, standing with his characteristic stillness, listening more than talking. He had not seen me yet, or he had seen me and was choosing not to show it, which with Rhett was always both possible and probable. Nathan was not here. That made sense. He had still been in the cafe booth when I left, and he had looked like a man who needed another 10 minutes and a decision before he was ready to be in public. Kaden was not immediately visible, which meant he was either in a side conversation or had not arrived yet. And either way, I was going to treat his absence as a gift and use it to move through the room productively before his scent made productive movement significantly more difficult. I circulated. I was good at this, or rather Rourke was good at this, and his muscle memory for moving through a room full of powerful people transferred cleanly. I held my water glass. I exchanged pleasantries with three separate people whose names I accessed from Rourke's social memory without difficulty. And while I talked, I kept my other hand loose at my side, brushing surfaces when it was natural to do so. Testing. A display table near the window. The emotion on it was generic, ambient, the low hum of many hands over many hours. Nothing directed. The back of a chair where someone had left a jacket. Belonging and mild stress. Nothing useful. A business card from someone who pressed it into my hand with the aggressive cheerfulness of someone who genuinely loved networking. I felt a brief flash of ambition, clean and simple. Not my target. I was on my third circuit of the room when I felt the shift in the air before I saw him. Cedar and deep amber. Fire that had been burning a long time. Kaden Mercer had arrived. I did not turn around. I tracked him by scent and by the subtle change in the room's social gravity, the way conversations near the door adjusted, the way space rearranged itself without anyone consciously deciding to rearrange it. He moved through rooms the way weather moved through a forecast. People did not part for him dramatically. They just found themselves standing slightly differently. The bond thread pulled. I breathed through it, which was getting easier, which was either good news or a sign I was adapting to something I should not be adapting to. I turned to the bay window and looked out at the water, gray and wide, a container ship moving slowly across the middle distance, like something from a different scale of time entirely. The drizzle had stopped. The bay was doing its afternoon thing of looking deceptively calm. "You came," Kaden's voice. Close, closer than I had tracked him, which meant he had moved toward me specifically, rather than just circulating and landing in my vicinity. That was a choice. I noted it. I turned around. He was standing 2 feet away, which in a crowded room was a deliberate distance. Close enough to be a conversation, far enough to be deniable as one. He had a glass of something amber in his hand, and his jacket was slightly different from this morning. Same quality, different cut, which meant he had gone back to the office and changed, which meant he had known about this event all morning and had not mentioned it when we spoke in the cafe. "Rhett mentioned it," I said. Something moved through Kaden's expression. "Rhett mentioned it." "He said it was an open event," I said. "I work adjacent to your industry, Kaden. This is exactly the kind of thing I attend." This was true. Rourke Valentine's professional life, which I had accessed through his memory in gradual pieces throughout the morning, involved consulting work in the architecture of PAC-adjacent corporate structures, legal, organizational, financial. The kind of work that put him in rooms like this legitimately and often. Kaden looked at me with that particular focused attention of his, the kind that took inventory without performing it. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," I said honestly. "What changed your mind?" I thought about Marcus Vell, about Elliot Voss, about a setup that had started 2 years ago and was currently aimed at both Nathan and me from a direction the novel had never shown. Curiosity, I said. I'm working on something. This room seemed useful. Kaden studied me. What are you working on? Something I'm not ready to share yet, I said pleasantly. Ask me again in a few days. The look on his face was genuinely interesting. Not frustrated, something more careful than that. Like he was sitting with the experience of someone not immediately giving him information he wanted, and finding it unfamiliar in a way that required a moment to process. You've changed, he said. Third person to say that today, I said. I'm starting to wonder what the previous version of me was doing that set the bar so low. The corner of his mouth moved. It was the smallest possible movement, barely a disruption in the controlled line of his expression, but I saw it because I was looking for it, and because it was so infrequent in the novel that I had memorized the 2 scenes where it appeared. Kaden Mercer had almost smiled at something I said. I was filing that under significant and moving on. How was the rest of your morning? He said. Productive, I said. Educational, slightly damp. I looked at him over my water glass. You? Fine, he said. That's what I said this morning, I said. You told me it was good. It was, he said, something quiet in his voice now, underneath the control. Seeing you was... He stopped, adjusted. It was unexpected. I let that sentence sit without finishing it for him, because the word he had dropped before stopping was going to stay with me for a while regardless, and filling in the blank for him would have let him take it back too easily. Across the room, Rhett had spotted us. I could tell by the way his conversation shifted, not stopping, just reorienting, the way Rhett reoriented everything, with precision and no visible tells except that he was now facing our direction at a 15-degree angle that looked accidental and was not. Nathan called me after you left the cafe, Kaden said. I kept my expression level. Did he? He said you two had a good conversation. A pause. He seemed lighter. Nathan is carrying something heavy, I said carefully. He needed somewhere to put a little of it. Kaden looked at me. What is he carrying? That's his to share, I said. I'm not going to go around him, but I'd suggest making it easy for him to come to you. He's trying to figure out how. The silence that followed was a different quality from all the others today. Kaden Mercer was looking at me with an expression that had let go of something it had been holding, some layer of the professional composure that usually sat on top of everything else. And underneath it was something that looked like the face of a person who was genuinely trying to understand something and finding it harder than he expected. Why are you doing this? He said. Doing what? This. He gestured slightly, a small movement that seemed to indicate me, the conversation, the morning, everything. You could be angry. You have every reason to be angry, and instead you're... I'm what? I said. He looked at me. Kind, he said, like the word surprised him on the way out. I thought about that for a moment. The honest answer was that I was kind because I had arrived in this body knowing too much about how the cruelty played out, and because Nathan Cole was not a villain, and Kaden Mercer was not a simple story, and Rhett Sullivan had sat across from me in a cafe uninvited and almost smiled, and because the thread behind my ribs had been pulling all day, and I was tired of pretending it was purely biological. The available answer was simpler. Because angry is boring, I said, and I've never been boring in my life. Kaden looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, come with me, and turned and walked toward the far end of the hall, where a corridor led to the building's quieter north section, and I stood there for exactly 2 seconds weighing every possible version of what followed before I followed him. The corridor was cooler and significantly quieter, the noise of the event dropping off as we moved away from it. The bay windows here were larger, floor to ceiling, and the water outside was right there, close and gray and moving. Kaden stopped near the far end where a wooden bench ran along the wall beneath the glass. He did not sit. He stood facing the window with his hands loose at his sides and his glass still in one hand, and he looked out at the bay with an expression that had nothing managed about it, just a person looking at water. I stood beside him, not close, not far, the distance of two people who had not decided yet. "I miss this," he said, not to me exactly, just out loud toward the water. My chest did something slow and complicated. "This?" I said. "Talking to you," he said, "the way it actually is, not through assistance or silence or whatever the last 6 weeks have been." He exhaled. I convinced myself it was the right call, that clean breaks were kinder. "They're not," I said. "They're just easier to make." He turned his head and looked at me. We were close enough that I could see the detail of his expression clearly, the controlled set of it with something underneath that was not controlled at all, something that had been sitting in the space below the surface for longer than 6 weeks, maybe longer than I knew. "I know," he said. The bond thread pulled so firmly it nearly stopped my breath. I pressed my lips together and held it, because this was the kind of moment that the novel had never given Rourke, and that I was therefore completely unprepared for. Kaden Mercer standing next to me in the quiet north corridor of the ferry building, with his composure gone thin and his voice carrying the weight of something true. I made myself look back at the water. "The note you left," I said, "don't contact us." I kept my voice level. "Did you mean it?" A long pause. "I thought I did," he said. "And now? Now I'm standing in a corridor with you having a conversation I didn't plan to have, so..." He paused. "Make of that what you will." I almost laughed. I pressed it down and kept looking at the water, at the container ship that had moved further across the bay now, smaller with distance. "Kaden," I said. "Yeah. Someone is running a play against this pack," I said. "Against Nathan specifically, and through Nathan at the rest of you. I don't have all the pieces yet, but I'm close." I turned my head and looked at him directly. "I need you to trust me for about 4 days. Not completely, not blind, but enough." He held my gaze. "Trust you to do what?" "To handle something before it becomes your problem," I said, "and to come to you when I have the full picture." "Why not come to me now?" "Because right now I have half a picture and 2 names and a theory," I said, "and you're someone who needs the full picture before he acts, which is correct, but it means giving you half of it prematurely just gives you something to worry about without anything to do." He was quiet, looking at me with that focused, inventorying attention, but warmer now than it had been this morning in the cafe, the edges of it less defended. "4 days," he said. "Maybe 3, I said. "I'm efficient." The ghost of that almost smile again, closer to the surface than the first time. "You are," he said, like he was remembering something, like the memory of it was not painful, exactly, but sat in a place that had been. I looked at him for a moment. The cedar and amber scent was close and steady, and the bond thread was a constant gentle pull, and the corridor was quiet, and the bay was right there through the glass, and I was acutely aware that I was standing next to a person I had read about 3 times and thought I understood, and was rapidly discovering I did not understand at all, which was the most human thing about this entire inhuman situation. His hands shifted at his side, just slightly. His knuckles were close to mine, a few inches, the space between us that was not quite touching. I looked at that space. I looked at it for long enough that it became a thing we were both aware of, the particular charge quality of a distance that 2 people are both noticing simultaneously, and neither has decided to cross. Then Kaden said quietly, "I'm sorry. For the note." I breathed. "I know," I said. "That's the 2nd time today you've said that to someone," he said. "You're the 2nd person who's deserved it today," I said. His hand moved, slowly, deliberately, with the careful intentionality of someone who was making a choice rather than acting on reflex. His fingers settled over mine against the bench. Not a grip, not a hold, just a resting. Warm and steady, the weight of it simple and completely devastating. I did not move my hand. I did not move anything. I stood very still and felt the warmth of his hand over mine, and the pull of the bond, and the complicated, inconvenient truth that I had arrived in this story knowing exactly how it was supposed to end, and was now standing in a corridor, holding very still, while Kaden Mercer's hand rested on mine, and the bay moved outside, and none of this was in the novel. None of this had ever been in the novel. 4 days, he said again, soft. 4 days, I confirmed. We stood there. The event murmured distantly behind us. The water moved. His hand stayed where it was, and mine stayed where it was, and we both looked at the bay, and the bond thread was warm rather than pulling now, settled and present like something that had stopped fighting and started breathing. It was the most fragile thing that had happened to me all day. I was aware that fragile things broke. I was aware that I was inside a story that had been built to break this specific feeling in the most public and painful way possible. I was aware of Elliot Voss in Marcus Vell and the gala 6 weeks out, and all the moving pieces I had not yet solved. But Kaden's hand was warm, and the bay was right there, and for 30 seconds I let myself just be in it. 30 seconds, that was what I allowed. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, and I straightened slightly, and Kaden's hand lifted, and we both turned back toward the sound of the event, like two people remembering at the same time that the world outside a corridor existed. I checked my phone. Unknown number. A text. 4 words. I know what you are. I stared at the message. My pulse kicked once, sharp and high, then steadied. Not Elliot Voss's number. I had seen that number on Nathan's phone. This was different. New. Someone who had gotten Rourke's number from somewhere, who had chosen this exact moment to send 4 words that were specifically calibrated to land as a threat. Someone was watching. Someone had seen me arrive at this event. Someone knew I was inside this story in a way that should not have been visible to anyone. My hand closed around the phone. Everything okay? Kaden said. I looked up at him and arranged my expression into something easy and present. Yes, I said, just something I need to follow up on. He looked at me for a moment. You're sure? Completely, I said. And then because the 30 seconds were over and the fragile thing needed to be handled carefully rather than held too long. Go back to your event, Kaden. I'll be in touch. He held my gaze for one more beat. Then he nodded once and straightened his jacket and walked back down the corridor toward the sound and the warmth of 200 people who had no idea what was happening in the quiet north end of this building. I looked back at my phone. I know what you are. The bay moved outside. The container ship was nearly gone from view. I typed back 2 words. Prove it. Then I pocketed the phone, rolled my shoulders back, and walked in the opposite direction from Kaden, toward the building's side exit, toward the street, toward whatever came next. Because something had just confirmed what the last 30 seconds had already told me. This story was not the novel anymore. It had not been the novel for a while, and someone else knew it. The side exit opened onto a narrow street running parallel to the Embarcadero, quieter than the main drag. The kind of in-between space cities produce between important buildings where delivery trucks parked and pigeons held conferences nobody documented. I stood on the wet pavement and looked at my phone and waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. Whoever had sent those 4 words was either composing a response or deciding whether I was worth responding to, and either way the waiting was going to tell me something about them. Patient people waited to see what you did with silence. Impatient people filled it. I was operating on the assumption that someone who had managed to surveil me well enough to know I was at this event and text me at the precise moment I was most emotionally off balance was probably patient, probably calculating, probably someone who had been watching this situation for longer than this morning. My phone buzzed. Not a text, a call. Same unknown number. I answered it. Silence first. 2 seconds of it, the kind of silence that was listening rather than empty. Then a voice, male, mid-range, unhurried in the way that people were unhurried when they held all the cards and knew it. "You responded faster than I expected," the voice said. "I'm efficient," I said. "Who is this?" "Someone who has been watching Rourke Valentine for a very long time," he said, "and who noticed approximately 12 hours ago that Rourke Valentine is no longer the person who was in that body yesterday." My pulse was doing something careful and controlled, and I was managing it through sheer force of will. "That's a creative theory," I said. "What makes you think I'm interested in hearing it?" "Because you typed back instead of blocking the number," he said, "which means you're already trying to figure out how much I know." Annoyingly accurate. "How much do you know?" I said. "Enough," he said. "I know that the original Rourke Valentine suffered a cardiac event at 11:47 last night. I know that whatever arrived in his body this morning is operating with foreknowledge of events that have not happened yet, based on behavioral changes inconsistent with any plausible overnight emotional shift." A pause. "I know you went to Parallel Coffee, not because Rourke had a habit there, but because you chose it deliberately to avoid his usual routes. I know you handled both Kaden and Rhett in ways that the original Rourke was not emotionally capable of today. And I know you just spent the last 30 minutes in the north corridor of the ferry building doing something the original would never have done." I was very still on the outside. On the inside, I was running through every implication of this conversation at approximately the speed of something very fast and very alarmed. "You have eyes on me," I said. "I have had eyes on this situation for 14 months, he said. "Why?" "Because Rourke Valentine was going to die," he said simply. "Not last night specifically. I did not predict the exact mechanism, but the trajectory of his life, the emotional state, the isolation, the way the pack dynamic was moving, the outcome was readable 12 months out to anyone paying the right kind of attention." He paused again. I was paying attention. The wet pavement reflected a pale strip of sky. A delivery truck turned into the far end of the street and parked, and 2 men got out and began unloading things without looking at me. Normal afternoon, completely normal Tuesday in San Francisco, while a stranger on the phone told me he had been watching the person whose body I was currently wearing die in slow motion for over a year. "Who are you?" I said. "My name is Elliot Voss," he said. I stopped breathing for 1 full second. Voss. Kara Voss, the journalist, the one Nathan was being blackmailed by, the one who had Marcus Vell somewhere in her operating history, and who had photographs of Nathan's illegal records access, and who had specifically requested a private journal from a grieving, isolated Omega. "Relation to Kara Voss," I said, not a question. "My sister," he said, and then, before I could arrange my response, "Which is not what you're thinking. My sister and I are not operating together. We have not spoken in 8 months, and what she is doing to Nathan Cole is something I have been trying to stop for the last 3 weeks, which is part of why I am calling you." I leaned my back against the building wall and looked up at the slice of sky above the narrow street and processed this in real time with the particular mental agility of someone who had survived a fatal ramen incident and was therefore unimpressed by ordinary chaos. "Explain," I said. "Kara has been building a story on the Mercer Pack for 14 months, Elliot said. "She is not a gossip journalist. That blog is a front. Her actual interest is in Mercer Industries' expansion into biotech. Specifically, the Omega designation research the company has been quietly funding for the last 3 years. Research that Kaden Mercer has kept off the public books because the ethics are complicated and the applications are more complicated than that." I straightened up from the wall. "What kind of research?" I said. "The kind that involves figuring out why certain Omega designations carry abilities that fall outside standard biological parameters," Elliot said. "Psychometry, for example, precognition, emotion manipulation, abilities that present in approximately 1 in 400 omegas, and that someone at Mercer Industries has been cataloging, funding, and quietly suppressing publication of for the last 3 years. The building wall was cold against my shoulders. The delivery men were still unloading. A seagull landed on the truck's roof and regarded the street with supreme indifference. I was standing on wet pavement in San Francisco, being told that the CEO, whose hand had rested on mine 20 minutes ago, had been running secret research on Omega abilities. On abilities like mine. Kaden knows about psychometry, I said. Flat, testing. Kaden Mercer funded a private study on psychometric omegas 18 months ago, Elliot said. The study identified 11 subjects. Rourke Valentine was one of them. The world did not tilt. I was holding it level through active effort. Rourke knew, I said. No, Elliot said. Rourke did not know he was a subject. The study used ambient data collection through objects placed in shared pack spaces. Nothing required Rourke's direct participation or consent. A pause, which is the ethics problem. I pressed my free hand flat against the building wall and breathed through the flood of cold that moved through my chest. Not my psychometry, just the ordinary human sensation of something you had been building a morning's worth of careful trust on, shifting under your feet without warning. Kaden Mercer had been studying Rourke without his knowledge. Kaden, who had rested his hand over mine in a quiet corridor. Kaden, who had said, "I miss this," toward a bay window with nothing managed about his expression. Kaden, who had sent a note that said, "Don't contact us," and then walked into a cafe and stayed long enough to be seen. Kaden, who had known what Rourke was and had never said a word. The thread behind my ribs did something I did not have language for. Not pulling this time, just present, the way a bruise was present, there and aching when you pressed it. "Why are you telling me this?" I said. "Because you are not Rourke Valentine," Elliot said, "and whatever you are, you arrived in a body that Kara is going to target within the next 10 days, and you are operating without the information you need to protect yourself or the people around you." He exhaled slowly. "And because I have been watching this situation for 14 months, and I am very tired of watching it go wrong." "You could have told the original Rourke," I said. "You had 14 months. "The original Rourke," Elliot said quietly, "would not have been able to hold this information without fracturing. He was not in a state to receive it. He was in a state of progressive emotional collapse, that the pack's behavior was accelerating, and introducing this on top of that would have," he stopped. "It would have been cruel." I stood with that for a moment. "And I'm not in that state," I said. "You are manifestly not in that state," he said. "You walked into a cafe this morning and handled Kaden Mercer and Rhett Sullivan inside 40 minutes, and then sat across from Nathan Cole and took apart a blackmail situation with the calm of someone who already knew where the pieces were. A beat. Which you did, didn't you? You knew." "I knew a version of it," I said carefully. "The version I knew was wrong about the reasons." "It usually is," he said. "Stories usually are." Something about that sentence landed strangely. I filed it to look at later. "What does Kara want?" I said. "She wants the research," he said. "The full data set. 11 omegas, their ability profiles, the suppression methodology Mercer Industries developed to keep the data private. She wants to publish it, and she does not particularly care who gets broken in the process of getting it." His voice was even, but there was something underneath it, the controlled heat of someone who had made their peace with a difficult truth about someone they loved. "She is not a good person doing a bad thing. She is doing exactly what she set out to do, and she set out to do something genuinely harmful." "Marcus Vell," I said. "Her contact," he said. "Yes. She placed him near Nathan 2 years ago, specifically to create a vulnerability she could use later. She is patient and she is thorough, and she has been working this angle for longer than you have been in that body." I looked at the sky again. pale and watery, and absolutely unbothered by any of this. "She doesn't know I'm not the original Rourke," I said. "Not yet," he said, "but she will. She has someone inside your building, Rourke, someone with access to the residential floors. When she figures out the behavioral shift, she will move faster than you're prepared for." Someone in my building. Someone who could access the 42nd floor. I thought of Gerald at the front desk, his practiced neutrality, the kind that came from seeing rich people do strange things and stopping the catalog, or the kind that came from being paid to see specific things and report them. "How do I find you?" I said. "I'll find you," he said. "Give me until tomorrow morning. There is something I need to retrieve first, something that proves what Mercer Industries has been doing, in Rourke's own hand, without requiring you to trust my word alone." "Why would I trust your word at all?" I said. "Your sister is the person running a play against everyone I'm trying to protect." "Because I called you," he said. "I had 14 months to do nothing. I called you 7 hours after you arrived." A pause. "I don't think that's the behavior of someone on the wrong side." I breathed out slowly. "Tomorrow morning," I said. "Parallel coffee," he said. 8 a.m. The call ended. I lowered the phone and stood on the wet pavement in the narrow street and let the full weight of the last 3 minutes settle over me like something dropped from a significant height. Kaden Mercer had funded research on Omega abilities. He had been in proximity to Rourke's psychometry for 2 years and had been collecting data on it through objects placed in shared spaces, which meant every time Rourke had touched something in the packed safe house, every time he had picked up a key or set down a glass or held a book someone had left, it had been a data point in a study he did not know he was part of. And Kaden had stood in a quiet corridor with his hand over mine and said, "I missed this," and looked at the bay with something unmanaged in his face. And I did not know anymore how much of that was real and how much of it was the behavior of a person who had been studying the person he was standing next to. The thread behind my ribs was still there, bruised feeling and present. I pushed off the wall and walked back toward the building's main entrance. Not because I was going back inside, because going away from the building would have looked like retreat. And I did not retreat. I went around the long way, out onto the Embarcadero proper, the wide waterfront path with the bay on one side and the city on the other, and I walked south into the wind. I needed to think before I did anything. I needed to think before I spoke to anyone, because the version of this morning I had built, the one where I was the person with the map and everyone else was navigating without one, had just developed a large crack down the center, and I needed to figure out which parts were still load-bearing before I trusted my weight to any of them. My phone buzzed again. Different number this time. "Nathan, are you still nearby? Kaden just told me you were at the event. I'm outside. Can we talk?" I looked at the message. Nathan Cole, who was being blackmailed by a woman who had spent 2 years setting him up through a planted contact, and who had come to me this morning with the specific vulnerability of a person running out of options. Nathan, who I had read as a secondary villain and who was actually a secondary victim of the same operation targeting both of us. And Kaden, who was either a man who had done something ethically inexcusable for reasons I did not yet fully understand, or a man who was a great deal more complicated than a secret biotech study made him appear. Or both. Probably both. I typed back to Nathan. "Front entrance, 2 minutes. Then I pocketed my phone and pulled my jacket tighter against the bay wind and turned back toward the building. Nathan was standing outside the main entrance when I came around from the Embarcadero, hands in his pockets, looking up at the clock tower with the particular unfocused gaze of someone thinking hard about something they were not looking at. He heard me coming and turned, and his expression did the thing it had done in the cafe, losing the layer of careful warmth and showing the actual person underneath. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. "Kaden said you left early." He frowned slightly. "You okay?" I looked at him. Nathan Cole, who did not know he had been manipulated into position 2 years ago, Nathan Cole, who was sitting on information about Kaden that he had obtained illegally and that Kara Voss was using as a lever because she had engineered the conditions for him to obtain it in the first place. Nathan, who had apologized to me twice today and meant both times. I had a choice about what to tell him. Right now, in this moment on the wet pavement outside the ferry building, with the bay wind coming in and the clock tower overhead. I could tell him about Elliot, about Kara's real agenda, about the biotech research and what it meant, and the fact that Rourke had been a subject without consent. I could give him the full picture, or as much of it as I had, and watch him take it in and wait to see how he held it. Or I could hold it for 20 hours until Elliot produced the proof, and protect the information until it was solid enough to use. I got a call, I said, something I need to follow up on. I met his eyes. Nathan, the thing you're being pressured about, the financial records. How did you access them? Walk me through the exact sequence. He looked at me. Why? Because the person who pointed you toward those records did it on purpose, I said, and I need to understand the full chain before tomorrow morning. Nathan stared at me for a long moment. The wind moved between us, cold and salt-edged. A foghorn somewhere out on the bay, distant and low. Marcus Vell told me the records were publicly accessible through a regulatory filing error, Nathan said slowly. He gave me a specific access point, said it would close within 48 hours due to the error being corrected, and that if I wanted to verify what he was telling me about Mercer's financial health, I had a narrow window. He paused. It was not a regulatory filing error. No, I said, it was not. It was a trap, he said. Yes, I said. The word landed on him heavily. I watched him absorb it. The specific reconfiguration of a person who has just been told that something they blamed themselves for was not their fault in the way they thought, which was its own complicated kind of relief, because it replaced guilt with something colder. Anger, maybe, the slow building kind. She set me up from the beginning, he said. 2 years ago, I said, before the pack even fully formed around Rourke. I paused. This was never about the journal, Nathan. The journal is just a tool. She wants something inside Mercer Industries, and she built this entire structure to get leverage over the people inside it. Nathan was quiet for a moment. His jaw was set. His eyes had gone to a place past me, not unfocused, but directed inward at something he was rearranging. Does Kaden know? He said. And there it was. The question I had been moving toward and away from for the last 15 minutes. Did Kaden know? Kaden, who had funded a study on Omega abilities. Kaden, who had been in proximity to a psychometric Omega for 2 years and had been gathering data. Kaden, who may or may not have known the full shape of what Kara Voss was actually after. Because if her target was the biotech research, and Kaden was running the biotech research, then the question of what Kaden knew and when he knew it was the most important question in this entire situation. I don't know yet what Kaden knows, I said, which was true in every dimension that mattered. Nathan looked at me sharply. What does that mean? It means there are things about this situation that I'm still mapping, I said, and I need to be sure before I say anything to anyone. I held his gaze, including you. Not because I don't trust you, because I need the full picture before I hand anyone a partial one. He studied me. You found something, he said. In the last hour, something you're not telling me. I found a direction, I said. I'm going to know more tomorrow. Rourke. Nathan. He exhaled hard through his nose, and I watched him decide to trust me, which was a visible thing on his face, the internal argument and the landing. Okay, he said. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, I said. In the meantime, don't contact Kara Voss. Don't respond to Marcus Vell if he reaches out. And, I stopped. And, he said, I thought about what Elliot had said, about Kaden being off for 3 weeks, about Nathan carrying something alone, about the way the pack's communication had gone tight the moment I showed up differently and started bending dominoes, and about a biotech study and shared pack spaces and objects placed deliberately, and 2 years of data collected from a person who never knew he was being read. Be careful around Kaden, I said. Not suspicious, just careful, until I know more. Nathan went very still. Why? He said. Tomorrow, I said again, quietly. I promise. He looked at me for a long moment with those dark, attentive eyes, and I held his gaze and did not look away. And the foghorn sounded again from somewhere out on the water, further this time, moving away. Okay, he said finally. Rourke. Yeah. Whatever this is, he said, you don't have to handle it alone. The sentence hit somewhere I had not defended. Simple and direct and completely unperformed. The way Nathan said things when the careful warmth was gone and it was just him talking. I held it for a second. I know, I said, and I almost meant it. I turned and walked north along the Embarcadero with the bay on my left and the city rising on my right and the cold, salt wind at my back, and I did not let myself feel any of it until I was far enough away that nobody was watching. Then I stopped walking. I stood on the waterfront path with my hand pressed flat against my sternum and the thread behind my ribs aching with the weight of everything I now knew and was not yet ready to say. And I breathed slowly and steadily and looked out at the bay. Kaden Mercer. I had spent 30 seconds in a quiet corridor letting myself almost believe something was real. And now I was standing on wet pavement with the information that the man who had rested his hand over mine had been running data collection on the ability that Rourke had never even known he possessed. The anger was there, quiet and cold, not explosive, not the kind that came out hot and ruined things, the kind that settled in the architecture of your thinking and stayed there and changed the shape of every conclusion. I had arrived in this story to save Rourke Valentine from an ending he did not deserve. I had arrived knowing the plot and thinking the knowledge was the advantage. But the plot had a basement the author had never shown me, and the basement was where the real story had been running all along. And I was standing at the top of the stairs looking down into it, with 6 weeks until a gala and a dead man's phone in my pocket, and an appointment at 8 tomorrow morning with a stranger who was the brother of the woman trying to burn everything down. I was not scared. I want to be clear about that. I was not scared. I was furious, which was different, and I was going to be very precise about what I did with it. I started walking again. The city rose around me, indifferent and enormous and completely unaware that the ground had just shifted under one very specific story it was hosting. And I walked through it with my jaw set and my shoulders level, and my mind running through everything I knew at the speed of someone who was done being surprised. Round 2 started tomorrow. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and also check our store for more varieties. We've got something special waiting for you. I planned to be ready. The walk back to my apartment took 40 minutes because I went the long way without deciding to, following the waterfront north past the piers until the bay opened up wide and the bridge appeared in the distance, cables disappearing into the low cloud. I did not look at my phone. I did not run through strategies or reconfigure timelines or make lists. I just walked and let the cold air do what cold air did, which was clarify things by making comfort unavailable. By the time I reached my building, the light had changed, the afternoon going towards something flatter and more honest, the gold stripped out of it. Gerald at the front desk said good evening when I passed, and I said it back and I looked at him, really looked, the way you looked at something when the context around it had shifted. His expression was the same, practiced, neutral, professionally pleasant. I kept walking to the elevator. In the apartment, I made tea because coffee at this hour would have kept me functional in ways that would outpace my actual need, which was to sit with something uncomfortable long enough to understand its full shape. I stood at the kitchen island with the mug in both hands and let the psychometry come when it was ready. Not grabbing for it, just leaving myself open, the way you left a door ajar in a quiet room. The mug was mine, Rourke's. Nothing on it but the accumulated warmth of a person who had made tea alone in this kitchen more times than was comfortable to think about. The emotion was layered and familiar and sad in the specific way of someone who was used to their own sadness, which was the saddest thing about it. I set the mug down and looked at the city through the window. Kaden Mercer had funded a study on psychometric omegas. He had been in shared spaces with Rourke for 2 years, and the data collection had been ambient, meaning objects, meaning every surface Rourke had touched in good faith inside a space he considered safe, had been a point on a research graph that Kaden had authorized and never disclosed. The anger was still cold, still architectural. It had settled into the walls of my thinking and was doing what it did, which was change the shape of every room. But underneath it, and this was the part I was least comfortable with, was a question I could not stop returning to. Why? Not why in the sense of motive. The biotech connection was clear enough. Mercer Industries funding ability research for competitive or scientific or financial reasons. The ethics complicated enough to keep it private. Why in the sense of Kaden specifically? Because the man who had stood in the north corridor of the ferry building with his composure gone thin and his voice carrying the weight of something genuine, the man who had said, "I miss this," toward a window with nothing performed about it, the man who had let his hand rest over mine with the deliberate care of someone making a choice, that man had also authorized a study on the person he was standing next to. Both of those things were true simultaneously. People were not plots. They were not written clean. I was aware that this thought was inconvenient for my anger, and I was having it anyway, because I had arrived in this story specifically because I thought the original version had gotten the people wrong, and I was not going to make the same mistake from the other direction. My phone was on the counter. I picked it up, palm flat, and read the notification that had come in while I was walking. Rhett Sullivan, a text sent 40 minutes ago. Nathan told me you two talked again. He seems different. Good different. I don't know what you said to him, but thank you. I stared at that message for a while. Rhett Sullivan did not send messages like that. The novel had been very clear about how Rhett communicated, which was precisely and functionally and with a remarkable economy of sentiment. This message had a period after thank you that felt like it had been thought about, like he had written it and deleted it and written it again and sent it before he could delete it a third time. I typed back, "He did it himself. I just made space for it." The response came in under a minute, which for Rhett was practically instantaneous emotional disclosure. That's what he needed. That's what all of us needed. Someone who made space instead of filling it. I put the phone down and pressed both hands flat on the counter and breathed through my nose and thought about the very specific unfairness of finding 3 people genuinely compelling on the same day you found out one of them had been running unauthorized research on the person whose life you were currently occupying. The thing about the thread behind my ribs was that it did not care about my objections. It had been there all day, pulling in 3 directions with the patient insistence of something that operated below the level of decision, and the new information had not stopped it. It had just made it ache differently, the way a joint ached when the weather changed. Present and complicated and not going anywhere. I was going to have to confront Kaden. Not tonight. Tonight I needed sleep, and Elliot Voss needed until morning, and I needed to have the proof in hand before I walked into that conversation. Because confronting Kaden Mercer without evidence was just an argument, and arguments gave people room to reframe. Evidence did not give room. Evidence was a room with only one door. But I was going to have to confront him, and I was going to have to do it knowing that whatever he said, whatever the reason turned out to be, the 30 seconds in the corridor had been real in some direction, even if it was also complicated. I was going to have to hold both of those things at once and decide what I wanted. That was the part that required the actual courage. I drank my tea. I went to bed. I did not sleep for approximately 90 minutes, and then I did, deeply, the sleep of someone who had processed a great deal and run out of the energy to continue processing. The alarm I had set on Rourke's phone went off at 7:15, and I was already mostly awake, lying in the dark of the expensive bedroom with the city's early light coming through the gap in the curtains and the thread behind my ribs present and steady like a morning pulse. I showered. I dressed. Dark trousers, fitted charcoal shirt, the jacket that started arguments. If I was going to spend today potentially dismantling a conspiracy and confronting an alpha CEO about covert research ethics, I was going to look excellent doing it. The Rourke Valentine aesthetic demanded nothing less. Parallel coffee at 7:53, the same table by the window. I ordered the same thing I had ordered yesterday because it was good, and because I was not going to become a person who changed their coffee order based on emotional turbulence. Elliot Voss walked in at 8 o'clock exactly. He was younger than his voice had suggested, mid-30s maybe, with the kind of face that was unremarkable until you watched it for a moment and realized it was doing a great deal of careful work. Medium height, dark coat, a leather satchel over one shoulder that looked like it had been carried for a long time. He spotted me without scanning the room, which meant he had a photo, which meant he had prepared for this, which was either reassuring or another thing to be cautious about. He sat across from me and put the satchel on the table between us. He did not extend his hand, and I did not offer mine. We looked at each other for a moment with the mutual assessment of two people who had spoken once under high stakes and were now sitting in the same physical space for the first time. "You look calmer than I expected," he said. "I'm always calm," I said. "It's a gift." I looked at the satchel. "Is that it?" "Most of it," he said. He unzipped it and pulled out a manila folder, thick, and set it on the table. The study documentation, protocol, consent waivers, or rather, the absence of consent waivers, data collection logs, 14 months of ambient psychometric testing on 11 omega subjects using embedded objects in shared social spaces. He paused. "And Rourke's file specifically, which is thicker than the others." I looked at the folder and did not immediately touch it. "Why is his thicker?" I said. Elliot was quiet for a moment. "Because Kaden Mercer flagged Rourke's file for personal review at month 3, he said. "Every data point after that was reviewed by Kaden directly. Not delegated. Him." He held my gaze. "The study ran for 14 months across 11 subjects. Kaden personally reviewed approximately one subject's file in real time over that period." I looked at the folder. "He was watching Rourke specifically," I said. "He was," Elliot said. "The question I cannot answer from the documentation alone is whether that was because Rourke's ability profile was the most scientifically interesting, or because of the personal relationship, or both, or something else entirely." He paused. "That answer you'll have to get from him." I reached out and put my hand flat on the folder. The psychometry came through like a current, layered and dense and shot through with multiple emotional signatures because the folder had been handled by more than one person over time. The top layer was Elliot, anxiety and determination, and the specific grief of someone who loved someone difficult and was trying to do the right thing in the space between them. Under that, clinical distance, the antiseptic blankness of people handling data, researchers who had separated the work from its human weight with practiced efficiency. And underneath all of that, in the oldest and deepest impression, something that stopped me completely. It was not clinical. It was not distant. It was the emotion of someone sitting alone with a folder in their hands, reading the same pages repeatedly. The feeling of someone trying to understand something that mattered to them in a way that went far past professional interest. The specific quality of attention that was not scientific. It was the feeling of someone learning a person they already cared about from the only angle available to them. I lifted my hand from the folder. I sat with what I had just felt for a moment, long enough to be sure of it. Then I looked at Elliot. "Your sister," I said. "She has someone in my building." "Gerald Park," he said. "The evening desk attendant. He started 4 months ago." He pulled a second document from the satchel, a single sheet. Employment records. She placed him there when the study data started suggesting Rourke was approaching a crisis point and the story was getting close to ready. Gerald. Gerald who worked evenings, not mornings. Gerald who I had passed yesterday evening and this morning and who had said good evening and good morning with the practiced neutrality of someone doing exactly what he had been paid to do. "She'll know the behavioral shift already," I said. "She may," he said, "or she may attribute it to emotional recovery. The change in you is significant, but Kara will be looking for confirmation before she moves." He paused. "You have a window. It's not large." "How do I close it?" I said. "The research documentation going public first," he said. "On your terms, not hers. If you control the narrative of the study, you remove her leverage. She cannot threaten to expose Kaden's research if it has already been disclosed and addressed." He looked at me steadily. "Which means Kaden has to disclose it, publicly or at minimum to the relevant parties, with a corrective action plan." "Which means I have to tell Kaden I know," I said. "Yes," he said. "Today," I said. "I would recommend this morning," he said, "before Kara confirms what she's seeing and accelerates." I looked out the window. The same street, the same blue awning, the same San Francisco morning going about its business with no awareness of what was being arranged inside a coffee shop by its window. "Why does she want to expose it?" I said. "What does she actually gain from blowing up Mercer Industries research?" Elliot's expression shifted into something more tired and more honest. "She is not interested in justice," he said. "She is interested in acquisition. There is a competing biotech firm that has been trying to access Mercer's ability research data for 2 years. They cannot buy it and they cannot steal it through conventional means. But if Mercer Industries is publicly disgraced, forced to suspend operations, subject to regulatory investigation, the data becomes accessible through discovery." He paused. "She is not a journalist running a story. She is a corporate operative running a demolition." I stared at him. "She's being paid by a competitor. Has been for 14 months, he said, which is when she approached Marcus Vell, and when the study documentation came to my attention through a source I cannot disclose." He looked at his hands. "She is my sister. I spent 8 months trying to talk her out of it. At month 9, I stopped talking and started documenting." He nodded at the folder. "That is the result." I looked at this man sitting across from me who had spent 14 months watching his sister build a demolition charge aimed at multiple people, including a man who was now dead, and the person currently occupying his body, and who had called me 7 hours after I arrived and put everything on the table. "Thank you," I said. He looked faintly surprised, the way people did when gratitude arrived without conditions. "I should have moved sooner," he said. "You moved when you could," I said. "That matters." He was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" he said. I picked up the folder, tucked it under my arm, and stood. "What should have been done a while ago," I said, "with better information than the original version had." I left Elliot at the table with his satchel and his tired eyes, and I walked out into the morning, and I pulled out my phone, and I called Kaden Mercer. He answered on the second ring. "Rourke," his voice was careful, aware. "I need to see you," I said. "Not at Mercer Tower, not at the Ferry Building, somewhere private." A pause, shorter than I expected. "The safe house," he said. "An hour." "An hour," I confirmed. I hung up and stood on the sidewalk with the folder under my arm and the city morning moving around me, and the thread behind my ribs pulled tight and steady and full of everything I was about to walk into. The safe house was a brownstone in Pacific Heights that the pack used for internal meetings and extended stays. The kind of address that did not appear on any public record attached to Kaden's name. I had the address from Rourke's memory, embedded there the way long familiarity embedded things, more reflex than recall. I walked because walking was the right speed for what I was preparing to do, and because the fog was back this morning, softer than yesterday, sitting low over the hills and making the city feel closer and more contained. I arrived at 53 minutes, close enough. Kaden opened the door himself, no assistant, no intermediary. He was in a dark sweater and trousers rather than a suit, and he looked like someone who had not slept perfectly, which was not a state I was accustomed to seeing on him because the novel had never written him tired. He held the door and looked at me and at the folder under my arm, and something moved through his expression that I could not name immediately. "Come in," he said. The safe house interior was warm and quiet, the kind of space that absorbs sound, all dark wood and full bookshelves, and the particular lived-in quality of a place that had seen real conversations rather than performed ones. I knew this space from Rourke's memory, but it landed differently than the memory, fuller and more specific. The smell of cedar and something old, and the faint trace of all three alphas present in the ambient scent of a shared space. I sat in one of the chairs near the window. Kaden sat across from me. The folder was in my lap. Neither of us spoke first for a moment. "You know something," he said. "I know several things," I said. "I'm going to show you one of them, and then I need you to talk to me. Not in the managed way, not the Kaden Mercer in a board meeting way." I held his gaze. "The actual way." He looked at the folder. "What is that?" I set it on the table between us and opened it to the first page. The study header. Mercer Industries Biotech Division, Internal Classification, 14 months of dates, 11 subject codes, and at the top of the page, in the funding authorization line, Kaden's signature. The silence that followed was not the silence of denial. It was the silence of someone who had been holding something for a long time and had just felt the weight of it shift in a way they had not prepared for. "Where did you get this?" he said. Quiet. Controlled, but with something underneath the control that was not controlled at all. "Does it matter?" I said. "Yes," he said. "Elliot Voss," I said. "Kara Voss's brother. He's been documenting this for 8 months. He came to me yesterday." Kaden closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. Then he opened them and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on him in any version of this story. "How much does he have?" he said. "All of it," I said. "Protocol, data logs, collection methodology, subject files." I paused. "Your personal review flags on subject 11. Something moved through his face then. Not guilt exactly, but the expression of someone who had known a moment was coming and had still not fully prepared for the shape of it when it arrived. His hands were still on the arms of the chair. His jaw worked once. "I want to explain," he said. "I want you to," I said. "That's why I'm here." He looked at the folder for a moment, then he looked at me. "The study started as a legitimate research initiative," he said. "Ability mapping in designated omegas. The science is real, and the potential applications in healthcare and safety systems are significant." He exhaled. "The consent framework was inadequate. I knew it was inadequate, and I authorized it anyway because the board wanted data, and I convinced myself the ambient methodology was low enough impact to justify the gap." "That's the professional explanation," I said. "Give me the other one." A long pause. Kaden looked at his hands, then back at me. At month 3, Rourke's ability profile came across my desk. His psychometry readings were significantly stronger than the other subjects. Measurably. The data was unlike anything the study had produced. He stopped. I told myself I was flagging it for scientific reasons. "And then?" I said. "And then I kept reading the flags," he said, "every month, and it stopped being about the data." He said it quietly, without dressing it. I was reading about a person through the objects he touched, through what he felt when he held things, through what mattered to him. He looked at me steadily. I was learning Rourke in the only way I had at the time that did not require me to admit I wanted to. The room was very quiet. Outside, the fog-softened morning sat against the windows, and the city moved beyond it in its usual way, and none of it had any opinion about what was happening in this room. That is not an excuse, Kaden said. I want to be clear that I know it is not an excuse. He had the right to know. He had the right to consent or refuse, and I withheld that because I was... He stopped. Afraid, I said. He looked at me. You were afraid, I said, that if you told him he would leave, or that you would have to acknowledge what it meant that you were reading his file at midnight, personally, every month for over a year. I kept my voice even. And so you kept the distance and kept the data and convinced yourself the two things were separate. Yes, he said, low and without defense. I looked at him for a long moment. The cold anger from yesterday was still in the walls of my thinking. It had not gone away, but it had been joined now by the thing I had felt through the folder this morning, Kaden's emotional signature on those pages. The feeling of someone learning a person they already loved from the only angle they had allowed themselves. Both of those things were true simultaneously. I was holding them both. Kara Voss is not a journalist, I said. She is a corporate operative. She has been paid by a competitor firm for 14 months to demolish Mercer Industries by exposing this research through regulatory scandal. Nathan is her lever into the pack. You are her actual target. Kaden went very still. She has a source in my building, I said, placed 4 months ago. She is close to moving. I leaned forward slightly. You need to disclose the study, your terms, your framing, your corrective action. Today or tomorrow at the latest. You take the narrative before she does, or she detonates it on her schedule. He was quiet for a long moment, processing. The Kaden Mercer who ran board meetings and signed acquisition deals was doing what he did with complex information, taking it in cleanly and mapping the response architecture. But underneath that, visible to me now in a way the novel had never made visible, was the other thing. The person who had read Rourke's psychometric data at midnight and not asked himself honestly enough, why? I'll draft the disclosure today, he said. Regulatory notification, public statement, remediation plan for the subjects. He paused. I owe each of them a direct conversation. Starting with Rourke, I said. He looked at me. You're Rourke, he said. I know, I said. Then I'm starting with you, he said. And I am sorry. Not in the way that's supposed to close the conversation. In the way that means I understand what I did, and I am not going to ask you to be fine with it before you are, or at all, if that's where you land. He held my gaze. I violated your trust before you even knew you were trusting me. I know that. I sat with that. The cold anger, the complicated feeling from the folder, the thread behind my ribs, all of it present and layered and not resolving itself into something clean or simple. People were not plots. They were not written clean. I know, I said finally. We looked at each other across the table and the open folder between us, and the morning light came through the fog-softened window in that pale San Francisco way, and the silence was not empty. What do you need from me? Kaden said. The truth, I said. All of it, from now on. No data I haven't consented to, no information held back because it's inconvenient. I paused. And we deal with Kara Voss before she deals with us. Together, he said. I looked at him. Call Nathan and Rhett, I said. This afternoon, I'll come. All of it goes on the table. He nodded once. Then he said quieter, in the corridor yesterday. I know, I said. That was real, he said. I know that too, I said. The thread pulled, warm and steady and full of things that were not resolved, and were not going to be resolved today, but were also unmistakably real. Then we start there, he said. We start there, I agreed. Outside, the fog was burning off. The morning was choosing to become afternoon, slow and certain, the way mornings did when they had decided to keep going. I picked up the folder from the table and held it in my lap and felt Kaden's emotional signature in the paper and did not look away from the feeling. It was the most complicated true thing I had held all day. I held it anyway. The folder sat in my lap, and the morning continued becoming afternoon outside the fog-softened windows, and Kaden was looking at me with the expression of someone who had just handed over something heavy and was waiting to find out if the person across from him was going to put it down or keep holding it. I kept holding it. Call them, I said. Nathan and Rhett, this afternoon. Kaden pulled out his phone without hesitation. No deliberating, no managing the sequence. He called Nathan first, then Rhett, and both conversations were short and direct in the way Kaden was direct when he had decided something, which was the version of him that I suspected very few people ever saw because it required him to have already moved past the part where control felt necessary. He hung up after the second call. 2 hours, he said. They're both coming here. Good, I said. Rourke. I looked at him. How did you know, he said. About Kara, about the research, about all of it. He said it without accusation, just the genuine, open question of someone trying to map a person they thought they understood and finding the map insufficient. You walked in here yesterday a completely different person from the one who left 6 weeks ago. And today you're sitting across from me with 14 months of documented evidence and a full operational picture of something I didn't know anyone had access to. He paused. Who are you? The question landed in the same place Nathan's version of it had landed yesterday morning in the cafe. Quiet and genuinely curious, and carrying more weight than the words themselves. I looked at Kaden Mercer sitting across from me in the safe house with his dark sweater and his tired eyes and his signature on a folder that represented the most complicated thing anyone had ever done in the general direction of caring about someone, and I thought about how much of the truth I could give him. Not all of it, not yet. Some truths required architecture before they could be handed over safely. Someone who has been paying attention, I said, to things that weren't being looked at. He held my gaze for a long moment. That's not a full answer. No, I agreed, but it's a true one, and right now it's the one I have available. I tilted my head slightly. Ask me again in a few weeks. The corner of his mouth moved. That almost smile, the one I had cataloged twice and was rapidly accumulating a third sighting of. You said that yesterday, he said, in the cafe. I meant it then too, I said. He looked at me for another beat and then, with the air of someone making a considered decision to let something rest, nodded once. We sat in the quiet of the safe house while the afternoon arranged itself outside, and I thought about Elliot Voss sitting in parallel coffee with his satchel and his tired eyes, and about Nathan carrying 3 weeks of blackmail alone, and about Rhett sending a text with a period after thank you, like he had written and deleted it twice before sending. The 2 hours moved the way hours moved when something important was waiting at the end of them. I made tea in the safe house kitchen because Kaden told me where things were without me asking, and the kettle was the same one from Rourke's memory. Familiar in my hand and quiet on the emotions, just warmth. I brought 2 mugs back to the sitting room and set one in front of Kaden, and he looked at it and then at me with an expression that was not cataloged anywhere in the novel, because the novel had never put these 2 people in a room like this, together and honest and slightly exhausted and not performing anything. Thank you, he said. It's tea, I said. I know what it is, he said. I sat back down and wrapped my hands around my mug, and we sat in the particular comfortable quiet of 2 people who had just said the hardest things and were now simply existing in the same space, which was its own kind of intimacy. Nathan arrived first. He came through the door with the focused energy of someone who had spent 2 hours thinking and had arrived at conclusions he was ready to say out loud. He looked at me, and then at Kaden, and then at the folder on the table, and I watched him read the situation in about 4 seconds, the way perceptive people did. "Okay," he said. He sat down. Rhett was 11 minutes behind him, which for Rhett meant he had driven rather than taken a car service because driving alone was where Rhett Sullivan processed things. He came in with his jacket already in his hand and sat in the chair to Kaden's left without ceremony and looked at the three of us with those dark, assessing eyes. "Someone start," he said. I started. I laid it out the way I had built it. Elliot Voss, Marcus Vell, the planted vulnerability, the blackmail, the corporate operative structure, the competitor firm, the demolition plan. I watched their faces as I talked. Nathan went through 3 distinct emotional phases: recognition, anger, and then something that settled into a relief so profound it was almost physical. The specific relief of finding out that a thing you blamed yourself for was engineered rather than chosen. Rhett's expression did not change on the surface, but his hands on the arms of the chair shifted once, a single tightening and release, which for Rhett was the equivalent of a visible reaction. When I got to the research, I paused. "There's one more thing," I said. I looked at Kaden. "You should be the one to tell them." He held my gaze for a moment. Then he turned to Nathan and Rhett, and he told them. All of it. The study, the ambient collection, the consent gap, his personal review of Subject 11's file. He said it evenly and completely, and without softening the parts that needed to land hard. And when he was done, the room held a silence that was doing a lot of work. Rhett was the first one to speak. "You personally reviewed Rourke's file," he said, flat. "Yes," Kaden said. "Every month," Rhett said. "Yes." Rhett looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through his expression, complex and quiet. "Why didn't you just talk to him?" he said. And the way he said it was not angry. It was the genuine, bewildered question of someone who had also not talked to the person he should have talked to, and knew it, and was hearing his own failure in a different register. "I was afraid," Kaden said. Rhett looked at him. Then he looked at me. Then he looked back at his hands. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know what that is." Nathan was looking at Kaden with those attentive eyes, and I watched him run the full emotional calculation of it, the breach and the reason behind the breach, and the person who had committed it, and the complicated truth that people who were afraid sometimes did things that were wrong in the shape of things that were almost care. "You're going to disclose it," Nathan said, not a question. "Today," Kaden said. "Full regulatory notification, public statement, remediation for all 11 subjects. Personal conversations with each of them." He paused. "Starting with Rourke." Nathan looked at me. "Are you okay?" he said. "Working on it," I said, which was the most honest answer available. "That's fair," Nathan said. Rhett said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Elliot Voss." He said her name like he was filing it somewhere precise and permanent. "She is not going to stop." "She will when her leverage is gone," I said. Kaden's disclosure removes the threat value of the research exposure. Nathan's situation we address by going to the actual source. "Marcus Vell," Nathan said. "And Elliot Voss," I said. "He has documentation of the full operative structure, including the competitor firm's payments to Kara. That goes to the relevant authorities today." I looked around the room. "She built this on leverage. You remove the leverage points one by one, and the whole structure collapses." Rhett was nodding, the small, precise nod of someone running calculations and finding them sound. "The competitor firm," he said. "Do you have their name?" "Elliot does," I said. "I'll get it to you within the hour." Rhett pulled out his phone and began doing something on it with the focused economy of a person who had already decided what to do and was beginning to do it. Nathan leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at the folder on the table and then at Kaden. "I accessed your financial records," Nathan said, "illegally, 2 years ago." He said it the same way Kaden had said the study thing, evenly, completely, without softening. "I was set up to do it, but I did it. You should know." Kaden looked at him for a long moment. "I know," he said quietly. Nathan blinked. "You know?" "I've known for 14 months, Kaden said. "The access was flagged. I looked into it and found the setup behind it and decided—" He stopped. "I decided that the action without the intent behind it was not the thing I needed to address. The person who engineered the setup was—" He paused. "I should have told you I knew. Carrying it alone was not fair to you." Nathan stared at him. The relief on his face was a different kind from before. Not the relief of exoneration, but the relief of being known and not discarded for it. He pressed his lips together and looked at the middle distance for a moment and then said, "We are genuinely terrible at talking to each other." "Historically," I said. Rhett looked up from his phone. "Historically," he agreed, with the weight of someone including himself in that assessment. And then something happened that I had not predicted and that the novel had certainly never written. Nathan laughed. Short and genuine and slightly helpless, the laugh of someone who had arrived at the absurdity of a situation from the inside and could not do anything but acknowledge it. Kaden's almost smile arrived fully for the first time, actual and warm and changing the whole geography of his face. Rhett looked at both of them with an expression that was fighting a losing battle against doing the same thing. I sat in my chair with my tea and looked at the three of them and felt something move through my chest that was quiet and warm and entirely unexpected. We spent the next 2 hours working. Rhett got on a call with Mercer Industries' legal team and began the disclosure process. Nathan drafted a statement to his own attorney about the financial records access, framed correctly, cutting Kara's leverage cleanly. I texted Elliot for the competitor firm's name, and he sent it within minutes. Halloran Biotech, based in Seattle, publicly traded, suddenly very legally exposed. Rhett forwarded that to 3 separate people simultaneously with the focused efficiency of someone who found problem-solving genuinely calming. Kaden drafted the regulatory notification himself at the safe house table with the folder open in front of him. He showed me the draft before he sent it. I read it carefully. It was complete and unsparing and did not attempt to soften the consent gap or the ethical breach. It named the corrective action plan in specific terms. It was the document of someone who had decided that the truth was worth the cost of it. "Send it," I said. He sent it. By the time the work was done, the light outside had shifted into the soft gold of late afternoon, the fog entirely gone, the sky above Pacific Heights doing its best impression of somewhere forgiving. The safe house had the particular quality of a space after something important had happened in it, slightly changed, the air different. Nathan made food from what was in the safe house kitchen, which turned out to be a competent and comfortable thing he did without announcing it, moving around the kitchen with the ease of someone who had done it in this space before. He produced pasta and a salad and bread and set it on the dining table and said, "Come eat," the way you said it to people who were yours, without having to think about whether they were. I sat at the table. Kaden sat across from me. Rhett sat to my left. Nathan sat to my right and poured water into 4 glasses and passed the bread without ceremony. We ate. It was the most ordinary thing that had happened all day, and it was also, without question, the most significant. 4 people at a table, passing food, and talking about things that were not the crisis, because the crisis had been handled, and what was left was just the people, with all their complications and histories, and the things they had said today that could not be unsaid, sitting together in the gold afternoon light. At one point, Rhett said something dry and precise about the legal team's response time, and Nathan made a face that was clearly a long-running joke about something I did not have the context for. And Kaden shook his head with that fully arrived smile, and I sat there watching the three of them exist together in the easy, specific way of people who knew each other deeply and thought about what the novel had done with them. It had made them a backdrop, a mechanism, a set of beautiful, closed-off alphas arranged around a protagonist who was never supposed to be the point. They were the point, all of them, every complicated, flawed, genuinely trying inch of them. After dinner, Nathan washed up with the particular domestic ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. And Rhett took a call in the hallway, and I was standing at the sitting room window, looking at the city going golden, when Kaden came and stood beside me. The same position as the ferry building corridor. The same distance. The distance of two people who had not decided yet, except it was different now because we had decided some things today. Not all of them, and not the final ones, but some of them, and the space between us carried that. The gala, he said. What about it? I said. Come, he said. Not because the original plan called for it, not because of the pack optics. He paused. Because I want you there, as yourself, whatever that looks like right now. I looked at the city. The bay was just visible from this angle, a strip of it between buildings, going copper in the late light. I'll think about it, I said. You said that about the ferry building event, he said. And I showed up, I said. You did, he said, something warm in his voice. His hand moved, the same slow, deliberate movement as yesterday, the same careful intentionality. His fingers settled over mine against the window frame, and this time I did not hold myself still against it. I turned my hand over and let his close around it. The bond thread was warm and settled and present in a way it had not been all day. Not pulling, not aching, just there. Like something that had been trying to find a resting place and had finally been given one. I looked at our hands. I'm going to need more than 4 days, I said. I know, he said. The study thing is not resolved, I said. I'm not telling you it's fine because you apologized. I know, he said. And there are things about me that are going to take some time to explain, I said. Things that are going to sound strange. Stranger than everything that happened today, he said. Considerably, I said. He was quiet for a moment. I'll listen, he said, when you're ready. I know you will, I said, and I found, turning it over carefully, that I did know it. Not because the novel had told me, and not because the morning had told me in any clean or uncomplicated way. Because the folder had told me, in the oldest and deepest impression, the feeling of a person learning someone they already loved from the only angle they had allowed themselves. It was not an excuse. It was a truth. Both things could be true. Rhett came back from the hallway and stopped in the doorway when he saw us at the window, and his expression did the thing it had been doing all day, running its calculation and arriving somewhere that was not what the calculation had predicted. He looked at Kaden's hand over mine, and then at my face, and then he said, Halloran Biotech's board is having an extremely bad evening. Good, I said. Their legal exposure is significant, he said. He came and stood on my other side at the window, and he looked at the city the same way we were looking at it, and after a moment his shoulder was close enough to mine to be deliberate. Warm and present, not making a statement, just there. You did good today, he said quietly. We all did, I said. No, he said, you specifically. He looked at me sidelong. You walked into a situation that was designed to destroy someone, and you just didn't let it. It was going to take more than a bad plan and a gossip blog to destroy me, I said. Evidently, he said, with that ghost of a smile, the one that had been showing up more frequently all day, closer to the surface each time. Good. Nathan appeared in the doorway behind Rhett with a dish towel over his shoulder and looked at the three of us at the window and raised an eyebrow in that specific way he had. Are we having a moment? He said. Is this a moment? I want to know if I should feel left out. Come find out, I said. He crossed the room and stood on Kaden's other side, and we were 4 people at a window in Pacific Heights, with the city going gold below us, and the bay catching the last of the light. And the thread behind my ribs was not 3 separate pulls anymore. It was one thing, settled and warm, like a cord finally resolving after a very long time in tension. I had arrived in this story with a map and a strategy, and the certainty of someone who had read the ending and was determined to change it. And I had changed it, though not always in the ways I had planned, and not because I had been smarter than the original story. Because I had been willing to be wrong about the reasons. Because I had held the complicated truths alongside the simple ones instead of choosing between them. Because Rourke Valentine, the person whose body I was wearing and whose name I had grown into over the course of one very long Tuesday, had deserved someone to fight for him. And now here was the ending he deserved. Not perfect, not clean, not the tidy resolution of a story that knew it was a story and tied its threads to match. Nathan still had legal conversations ahead of him, and Kaden still had remediation conversations with 10 other Omegas, and Rhett still had a corporate operative to finish dismantling, and I still had the truth of what I was to eventually say out loud to people who would have to decide what to do with it. But Kaden's hand was warm around mine, and Rhett's shoulder was solid and present at my side, and Nathan was standing in a room he had cooked dinner in, with a dish towel over his shoulder, looking at the city like it was somewhere he was glad to be. And the light was extraordinary, that specific San Francisco late afternoon gold that happened only in the gap between the fog burning off and the evening fog coming back. A window of clarity that the city offered occasionally and briefly, and that was more beautiful for being temporary. "The gala," Nathan said, looking at the city. "He's coming," Kaden said. "I said I'd think about it," I said. "He's coming," Rhett said. "Unanimous," Nathan said. "The motion passes." "I hate all of you," I said. "No, you don't," Kaden said, quiet and certain. I looked at the city. "No," I said, "I don't." The light held for another few minutes, golden and clear, and none of us moved from the window. Below us, San Francisco went about its evening with its usual magnificent indifference, the bay going copper and then rose, and then the deep blue of a city finding its night, and the 4 of us stood in it and let it happen. The thread was warm and settled and entirely, finally, at rest. I had read this story 3 times. I had loved the villain and thought he deserved better, and then become him and found out I was right. Just not in any of the ways I had expected. He did deserve better. He was getting it. And somewhere in the quiet back of my awareness, in the place where the transmigrated soul of a 26-year-old with bad dietary habits and excellent taste in fictional Omegas had made its unlikely home in a borrowed body in a borrowed life, I let myself be glad. Not because it was perfect, because it was real. And real, with all its complications and costs, and the long, slow work of trust being rebuilt one honest conversation at a time, was the ending worth having. The light went gold. The city breathed. We stayed.